You've been punishing your present for your past for too long. You keep carrying old mistakes into new mornings, old shame into quiet nights, and old pain into moments that were supposed to bring peace. But if the past is already gone, why does it still feel like it owns you? Why does one memory still decide your mood? Why does one regret still make you feel unworthy of beginning again? The truth is, mental freedom does not come from changing what happened. It comes from changing the way you hold it. And Buddhist teachings show us that suffering grows when the mind keeps clinging to what cannot be undone. Tonight, as you listen, your heart will begin to loosen. Your mind will stop dragging yesterday into today. And little by little, you will see that your past may have shaped you, but it does not have to sentence you. This is not just a lesson about forgiveness. This is a doorway into mental freedom. Are you ready? Let's begin. And now that you can feel that small space opening inside you, that quiet distance between who you were and who you are becoming, something deeper begins to reveal itself. Because before you can truly stop punishing your present, you have to understand why your mind keeps bringing you back to what should already be over. This is where most people get stuck, not because they want to suffer, but because they don't yet see how the mind holds on to pain. There is a reason certain memories refuse to stay in the past. There is a reason your body reacts before your thoughts can catch up. And until you see this clearly, you will keep reliving moments that no longer exist, as if they are still happening. A quiet truth begins to surface here. The past does not return on its own. It is invited back again and again by a mind that believes there is still something left to fix. And as you begin to notice this, something shifts. Not outside, but within. Let's go deeper. There is something strange about the human mind. It can let go of 100 ordinary days, but it will hold tightly to one painful moment as if it contains something unfinished. You may not remember what you ate 2 weeks ago or what someone said in passing yesterday, but one mistake, one regret, one memory that carries weight can stay with you for years. It returns in silence, in stillness, in moments when you least expect it. And each time it comes back, it feels alive again. This is not because the past is still happening. It is because your mind does not experience time the way you think it does. To the mind, anything you focus on deeply becomes present. It does not matter if it happened 10 years ago or 10 minutes ago. When you replay it, your body reacts as if it is happening now. Your chest tightens, your thoughts speed up, your emotions rise, and suddenly you are no longer here. You are there again. The mind is not trying to harm you when it does this. It is trying to resolve something it believes is incomplete. It is searching for a different outcome, a better answer, a way to undo what cannot be undone. It replays the moment, hoping that if it looks at it from enough angles, it will find peace. But what it actually finds is repetition. This is where suffering begins to grow quietly. Every time you return to that memory, you strengthen it. Not because it becomes more real, but because it becomes more familiar. And the mind has a deep attachment to familiarity. Even painful familiarity can feel safer than the unknown. So it keeps going back, not because it enjoys the pain, but because it knows it. You start to believe that thinking about it means you are being responsible, that revisiting it means you are learning. But there is a point where reflection turns into rumination, a point where understanding becomes obsession, and when you cross that line, you are no longer learning from the past. You are living inside it. The body begins to carry this as well. You may notice tension without knowing why. You may feel heavy without any clear reason. You may react strongly to small things, not because of what is happening now, but because something old has been triggered. The mind sends a signal, the body follows, and suddenly the past is shaping your present again. This is how old pain continues long after the event has ended. The Buddha spoke about this in a very simple way. He said that pain is one arrow, but suffering is the second arrow we shoot at ourselves. The first arrow is what happened. The second arrow is how we keep reliving it, judging it, resisting it, and refusing to let it rest. Most people do not realize they are holding the bow. They think the pain is coming from outside, from what was done, from what was lost, from what cannot be changed. But the deeper truth is that the continuation of that pain comes from within, from the constant return, from the refusal to release the moment. This does not mean you are weak, it means you are human. The mind is designed to remember what hurts, because at one point, remembering pain kept you safe. It helped you avoid danger, avoid mistakes, avoid loss. But in the modern world, that same mechanism often turns inward. Instead of protecting you, it begins to trap you. You may find yourself asking the same questions again and again. Why did I do that? Why didn't I see it sooner? Why couldn't I be different? These questions feel important, but they often lead nowhere. They circle back to the same place, reinforcing the same feeling, keeping you tied to the same moment. There is also a deeper layer to this. Sometimes the mind holds on to pain because it believes letting go would mean forgetting. And forgetting can feel like dishonoring what happened or denying the impact it had on you. So you hold on, not because you want to suffer, but because you want to respect the weight of the experience. But holding on to pain is not the same as honoring it. You can remember without reliving, and you can learn without punishing, you can acknowledge without attaching. This is the shift that begins to loosen the grip of the past. Another reason the mind keeps replaying old pain is because it has formed an identity around it. At some point, the mistake or the regret stopped being something that happened, and it became something you believe about yourself. Not just, I made a mistake, but I am someone who ruins things. Not just, I hurt someone, but I am someone who causes pain. When this happens, the memory is no longer just a memory. It becomes evidence, proof that supports a story you tell about who you are, and the mind will keep returning to it because it is trying to confirm that story. This is how one moment can begin to define an entire identity. But identities built on pain are not stable. They require constant reinforcement. So the mind keeps searching for reminders, keeps replaying the same scenes, keeps pulling you back into the past to keep the story alive. And without realizing it, you begin to live according to that story. You hold yourself back, you hesitate, you doubt your worth, not because of who you are now, but because of who you believe you were. This is where the real weight comes from. It is not just the memory. It is what the memory has convinced you about yourself. Breaking this cycle does not require force. It requires awareness. You begin by noticing when the mind drifts back, not judging it, not fighting it, but simply seeing it for what it is, a habit, a pattern, a loop that has been repeated so many times it feels automatic. When you see it clearly, something begins to loosen. You realize that the memory is not happening to you. It is being created by you in this moment through attention. And attention is something you can gently guide. This does not mean you push the memory away. It means you stop feeding it. You stop adding new emotion to it. You let it arise, and you let it pass without building a home inside it. At first, this feels unfamiliar. The mind will try to return, to replay, to pull you back in. But each time you notice and choose not to engage, you weaken the pattern. Slowly, the space between you and the memory grows, and in that space something new becomes possible. You begin to feel you're present again, not as a continuation of the past, but as something separate, something fresh, something that does not need to carry what has already ended. This is where freedom begins, not by erasing the past, but by changing your relationship with it. And as this understanding settles, you start to see something even more important. The mind does not just replay pain because it wants answers. Sometimes it replays it because it believes you still owe something. And this is where the next layer begins to unfold. And as that realization begins to settle, something deeper starts to surface. You start to notice that the mind is not only replaying pain because it feels unfinished, but also because it believes it is doing something useful. It convinces you that going back again and again is a form of growth, a form of responsibility, even a form of wisdom. But there is a quiet confusion hidden inside this habit. Because not everything that feels like reflection is actually helping you move forward. There is a thin line most people never see. A line between remembering in a way that frees you and remembering in a way that keeps you stuck. And until that line becomes clear, you can spend years thinking you are learning, when in reality, you are only reliving. Something inside you already feels this. That subtle exhaustion after thinking about the same thing too many times. That heaviness that does not bring clarity, only more questions. That quiet sense that you have been here before, many times, and nothing truly changes. This is where the next truth begins to unfold. Because there is a hidden difference, and once you see it clearly, your relationship with the past will never be the same. There is a kind of remembering that is light. It comes, it teaches, and it leaves. It does not disturb your peace, it does not follow you into the present, it does not define how you see yourself. It simply gives you understanding and then steps aside. This is what real learning from the past feels like. But there is another kind of remembering that feels heavy. It stays longer than it needs to. It repeats itself without offering anything new. It pulls your attention away from what is in front of you and traps it in something that has already ended. This is what it means to live inside the past. Most people do not realize which one they are experiencing. They believe they are learning because the mind is active. Thoughts are moving. Questions are being asked. But activity is not the same as clarity. Movement is not the same as progress. When you are truly learning from the past, there is a moment where everything becomes simple. You see what happened, you understand what could have been different, and something inside you adjusts. There is no need to keep going back, because the lesson has already been absorbed. It feels complete. But when you are living inside the past, there is no sense of completion. The mind keeps circling. It revisits the same scene, looks at the same details, and asks the same questions, hoping for a different feeling. But the feeling does not change because nothing new is being added. The mind is not discovering, it is repeating. This repetition creates the illusion of responsibility. It makes you feel like you are doing something important by thinking about it again. It tells you that if you stop, you are ignoring it, avoiding it, or failing to learn from it. So you continue, not because it helps, but because it feels necessary. But real responsibility does not require endless revisiting. It requires awareness and then a willingness to move forward differently. The difference becomes clearer when you look at how each experience affects your present moment. When you learn from the past, your present becomes lighter. You feel more aware, more grounded, more capable of responding differently when similar situations arise. There is a quiet confidence that comes from understanding. But when you live inside the past, your present becomes heavier. Your energy is pulled backward. Your reactions are shaped by something that is no longer happening. You become more hesitant, more self-critical, more trapped in patterns that do not belong to who you are now. This is why it feels like you are not moving forward, even when time is passing. Because your attention is not here. It is somewhere else. There is also a subtle shift in how you see yourself. Learning from the past allows you to see your actions as separate from your identity. You recognize that you made a choice, But that choice does not define who you are. It becomes something you experienced, not something you are. But living inside the past blends the two together. The action and the identity become one. You stop saying, "That is something I did," and start saying, "That is who I am." And once that belief forms, it shapes everything. How you speak, how you act, how you see your future. This is how the past begins to control the present, not through events, but through identity. Another important difference lies in the direction of your attention. When you are learning, your attention moves forward. You take what you have understood and apply it to your life now. You become more aware in conversations, more thoughtful in your actions, more present in your decisions. But when you are living inside the past, your attention stays behind. Even when you are physically present, part of you is still looking back. Still analyzing, still questioning, still holding on to something that has already finished. This split in attention creates tension. You are here, but not fully here. And that partial presence prevents you from experiencing life as it is unfolding. There is also a difference in how the body responds. When learning takes place, the body relaxes. There is a sense of resolution, even if the memory itself is not pleasant. You feel a quiet acceptance, a willingness to let it be what it was. But when you are living inside the past, the body remains activated. There is tightness, discomfort, a subtle sense of unease. It is as if the experience is still happening, even though it is not. The body does not know the difference between a memory and reality when the mind is deeply engaged in it. This is why it can feel so real, because your system is responding as if it is real. Understanding this changes everything. It shows you that the goal is not to stop remembering. That is not possible, and it is not necessary. The goal is to change the way you relate to what you remember, to recognize when a memory is offering something useful and when it is simply pulling you back into a pattern. One of the simplest ways to notice the difference is to ask yourself a quiet question. Is this helping me move forward, or is it keeping me where I am? The answer is often clear if you are willing to listen. Another sign is repetition without new insight. If you have thought about something many times and it still feels the same, it is no longer serving you. The lesson has already been learned, even if you do not feel complete. Continuing to revisit it will not change that feeling. It will only deepen the habit. Letting go at this point is not avoidance, it is wisdom. It is recognizing that the mind has done its work, and now it is time to return to the present. This return is where life actually happens, not in the memory, not in the analysis, not in the endless search for a different outcome, but here, in what you are doing now, in how you are responding now, in who you are choosing to be now. The more you bring your attention back, the more you weaken the habit of living in the past. And slowly, the weight begins to lift. Not because the past disappears, but because it no longer occupies the space it once did. You begin to feel a quiet separation. The memory is there, but it is no longer pulling you in. You can see it, but you are not inside it. This is the difference. And once you experience it, even for a moment, you realize something important. You were never meant to live there. The past was meant to pass through you, not hold you in place. And as this becomes clearer, another layer reveals itself, because sometimes the reason you stay connected to the past is not just because you are trying to learn from it. It is because you are still holding yourself accountable in a way that goes beyond understanding, a way that feels like responsibility but slowly turns into something else. And as that deeper layer begins to reveal itself, something uncomfortable starts to feel familiar. You begin to notice that what you once called responsibility has slowly taken a different shape. It no longer feels like learning. It no longer feels like growth. It feels heavier than that, more personal, more persistent. It follows you quietly. It shows up in small thoughts, in passing moments, in the way you speak to yourself when no one is around. It sounds like honesty, but it feels like punishment. And the more you listen to it, the more it convinces you that holding on to it is the right thing to do. But there is something hidden inside this pattern that most people never question. Because what if the reason you cannot let go is not because you still need to understand, but because you have become attached to the blame itself? A subtle shift happens here, one that changes everything. Let's go deeper. There is a form of attachment that does not look like desire, craving, or pleasure. It looks like guilt. It looks like holding yourself accountable. It looks like being hard on yourself because you believe you should be. And because of that, it often goes unnoticed. Self-blame feels justified. It feels like proof that you care, that you are aware, that you are not ignoring what happened. It gives you the sense that you are being responsible for your actions. And in many ways, that is true at the beginning. But something changes when that responsibility turns into identity. At first, you acknowledge the mistake. You see clearly what went wrong. You feel the weight of it, and that awareness helps you grow. But if that process is not allowed to complete, it transforms. The mind holds on to the blame, not as a lesson, but as something to carry. It begins to repeat quietly. You should have known better. You shouldn't have done that. You always ruin things. These thoughts do not come loudly. They come softly, almost like a whisper you have heard so many times that it feels like your own voice. And because they feel familiar, you trust them. This is where attachment forms, not to the event itself, but to the way you judge yourself because of it. The mind creates a loop. It returns to the past, not to understand it, but to reinforce the belief that you are at fault. And each time it does, that belief becomes stronger. It settles deeper into your sense of self. What started as awareness becomes a label. And once you carry that label, you begin to act from it. You hesitate before speaking because you remember a time you said the wrong thing. You hold back from opportunities because you remember a time you failed. You doubt your intentions because you remember a time you hurt someone. In this way, self-blame does not stay in the past. It shapes the present. This is why it becomes attachment, because you are no longer just remembering what happened. You are holding on to a version of yourself that is defined by it. And the mind resists letting go of this version because it believes that releasing the blame means avoiding responsibility. It feels like you would be excusing what happened, as if you are saying it did not matter. But this is not true. There is a difference between releasing blame and abandoning awareness. Releasing blame means you have already understood. You have already seen clearly what happened. You have already taken the lesson. There is nothing more to gain from repeating the judgment. Abandoning awareness would mean ignoring the lesson entirely. These are not the same. But the mind often confuses them. It holds on to blame as a way of staying connected to the lesson, not realizing that the lesson has already been learned. It believes that if it stops blaming, it will forget, that it will become careless, that it will repeat the same mistake again, so it keeps the blame alive, just in case. This is how attachment hides. It disguises itself as caution, as responsibility, as self-discipline. But if you look closely, you begin to see that it does not lead to clarity. It leads to heaviness. It does not guide you forward. It holds you back. Another way this attachment shows up is through a quiet need to balance something that cannot be balanced. You may feel like you owe something to the past, like you need to make up for what happened, even if there is nothing you can actually do. This creates a constant inner tension. You try to be better, not from a place of growth, but from a place of repayment. You try to prove that you are not the person who made that mistake. You push yourself, judge yourself, and measure yourself against a standard that is built on something that is already gone. And no matter how much you do, it never feels enough. Because the debt you are trying to pay does not exist in reality. It exists in the mind. This is one of the most subtle forms of suffering. You are not being punished by the past. You are continuing the punishment in the present. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering. But most people only think of attachment in terms of wanting things. Wanting success, wanting approval, wanting pleasure. Very few people realize that you can also be attached to pain, attached to guilt, attached to regret, attached to the idea that you must carry something in order to be worthy. This kind of attachment is harder to see because it feels like the opposite of desire. It feels like discipline, like humility, like honesty. But if it keeps you stuck, if it prevents you from being present, if it continues to create suffering, then it is still attachment. And attachment, no matter what form it takes, keeps you from freedom. The shift begins when you start to question the necessity of the blame. Not the event, not the lesson, but the ongoing judgment. You begin to ask quietly, what is this doing for me now? If the answer is clarity, then it is still serving a purpose. But if the answer is heaviness, hesitation, or self-rejection, then it is no longer helping you. It is holding you. This realization does not require force. You do not have to fight the thoughts or push them away. You only need to see them clearly. Each time the mind returns to blame, you notice it. You see the pattern. You recognize that this is not new information. This is repetition, and in that recognition, something begins to loosen. You are no longer fully inside the thought. You are observing it. And from that place, you have a choice. You can continue the pattern, or you can gently step out of it. This does not happen all at once. The mind will return many times. It has practiced this pattern for a long time. It feels natural, but each time you choose not to engage, not to add more judgment, not to reinforce the identity, you weaken the attachment. Slowly, the space grows. The voice of blame becomes quieter. The sense of identity begins to shift. You start to see yourself not as someone who needs to be punished, but as someone who has learned. And this changes how you move through the present. You begin to act with more openness, more confidence, more ease. Not because the past has been erased, but because it is no longer defining you. This is the beginning of freedom. Not from what happened, but from how you hold it. And as this becomes clearer, another layer reveals itself. Because sometimes the reason self-blame feels so strong is not just because of attachment. It is because it is connected to something even deeper, a belief that feeling regret is the same as taking responsibility. And that belief, if not understood, can keep you trapped in a cycle that feels right, but quietly harms you. And as that quiet shift begins to take place, another belief starts to reveal itself beneath the surface. It is a belief so common that it rarely gets questioned. It feels right, almost automatic, like something you were taught without anyone ever saying it out loud. It tells you that if you truly care about what happened, you must feel regret. And not just for a moment, but for a long time. It tells you that the depth of your regret is proof of your responsibility. That if you stop feeling bad, it must mean you never cared enough. This is where the confusion deepens, because something inside you already senses that holding on to regret is not helping anymore, yet another part of you resists letting it go. It feels like you would be abandoning something important, like you would be letting yourself off too easily. So you stay there, not because it heals you, but because it feels like the right thing to do. But there is a hidden cost to this, and once you see it clearly, the weight you have been carrying will begin to feel different. Let's go deeper. Regret has a very convincing voice. It speaks in a way that feels honest and responsible. It reminds you of what happened, points to what could have been different, and keeps your attention fixed on the gap between what was and what you wish it had been. At first, this seems useful. Regret can help you see your actions clearly. It can show you where you went wrong. It can create a moment of awareness that allows you to grow. In this sense, regret begins as a teacher. But something subtle happens when that moment of awareness is not allowed to complete. Instead of moving through you, regret stays. And when it stays, it begins to change its role. It no longer teaches, it starts to judge. It tells you that you should have been better, wiser, more careful. It compares who you were to who you believe you should have been. And in that comparison, it creates a feeling of lack, a sense that you failed to meet a standard that only exists now, after the fact. This is where regret starts to feel like responsibility. You begin to believe that continuing to feel bad is a way of taking ownership, that the discomfort is necessary, that it proves you understand the weight of what happened. But here is the deeper truth. Responsibility is about what you do with your awareness. Regret, when held for too long, is about how you keep punishing yourself for not having that awareness sooner. These are not the same. One moves you forward, the other keeps you still. The mind confuses them because both involve attention on the past. Both involve reflection. Both involve emotion, but their direction is different. Responsibility looks at the past and asks, what can I learn from this so I can act differently now? Self-punishment looks at the past and says, I should have already been different, and I will remind myself of that again and again. This difference is easy to miss because the language feels similar, but the feeling is not. When you are taking responsibility, there is a sense of clarity, even if it is uncomfortable. There is a movement, a quiet shift in how you see things. It feels like something has been understood. But when you are caught in regret that has turned into self-punishment, there is no movement, only repetition. The same thoughts return, the same emotions rise, and nothing new is gained. You are not learning anymore. You are reinforcing. This is why it feels heavy, because the mind is working hard but not moving forward. There is also a deeper emotional layer to this. Regret often carries a hidden desire to undo what cannot be undone. It looks back and wishes things were different, and that wish becomes a quiet resistance to reality. You replay the moment not just to understand it, but to feel like you are still connected to a version of it that could change. But reality does not respond to repetition. No matter how many times you think about it, the event remains as it is, and this creates a tension inside you. A part of you knows it is over. Another part refuses to accept it. That tension is what keeps regret alive. It is not just about what happened. It is about the gap between what is and what you wish had been, and as long as that gap is held tightly, the mind continues to return. There is another subtle pattern that often goes unnoticed. Sometimes regret becomes a way of holding on to a sense of control. It creates the feeling that if you had been different, the outcome would have been different, and that belief gives you a sense of power. It tells you that everything could have been changed, if only you had done something else. But this belief is not always accurate. It overlooks the complexity of life, the many factors that influence outcomes, the limitations of your awareness at the time. It places all responsibility on you, ignoring the reality that you were acting from a certain level of understanding, in a certain moment, with certain conditions. When you see this clearly, something begins to soften. You realize that regret has been asking you to be someone you were not capable of being at that time. It has been holding you to a standard that only exists now, after you have learned. And this is where the shift begins. You start to see that the version of you who made that decision was not the same as the one who is reflecting on it now. That version had less information, less awareness, less clarity. It did the best it could with what it had, even if the outcome was not what you wanted. This does not remove responsibility, it brings it into the present. Instead of asking, why was I not better then? You begin to ask, What can I do differently now that I see more clearly? This question opens a new direction. It takes the energy that was trapped in regret and moves it into action. It allows the past to become part of your growth, not a source of ongoing punishment. But the mind often resists this shift. It feels like letting go of regret would mean letting go of accountability. It feels like you would be saying it did not matter. But this is not what is happening. Letting go of regret does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop hurting yourself in the name of caring. There is a quiet strength in this, a strength that comes from being able to face what happened, take the lesson, and then allow yourself to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. This is not denial, it is acceptance, and acceptance is not passive. It is the recognition that what has happened cannot be changed, but what you do now can. The Buddha taught that clinging leads to suffering. Regret, when it becomes self-punishment, is a form of clinging to a different version of the past, clinging to the idea that things should have been different, clinging to the belief that you must continue to feel bad in order to be responsible. When you begin to release this clinging, something shifts. The past remains as it is, but your relationship with it changes. You no longer feel the need to revisit it in the same way. You no longer feel the need to prove your responsibility through pain. You begin to trust that the lesson has already shaped you, that your awareness now is evidence of that learning. And from that place, you can act differently. You can speak differently. You can choose differently. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because you see more clearly. This is where real responsibility lives, not in how long you feel regret, but in how you show up now. And as this understanding settles, another realization begins to emerge. Because even when you start to loosen your grip on regret, there is still a deeper layer waiting to be seen. A layer that asks you to look at your past self in a completely different way. Not with judgment, not with blame, but with something most people never offer themselves. And as that realization settles, something softer begins to emerge beneath everything you have been carrying. You start to sense that maybe the problem was never just what happened, or even how long you held on to regret, but the way you have been looking at yourself all this time. There is a quiet resistance here, a hesitation to let go of judgment, because it has felt like the only honest response. But what if the honesty you need now is not harsh, not punishing, but deeply understanding? Because there is a way of seeing your past that does not weaken you, does not excuse everything, and does not erase what happened. It simply changes the lens through which you view it, and once that lens shifts, something inside you begins to release. Let's go deeper. There is a version of you that still lives in your memory, not as a separate person, but as a snapshot in time. That version made choices, said things, acted in ways that now feel difficult to accept. And each time you return to those moments, you look at that version of yourself through the eyes you have today. You see clearly now what you could not see then. You understand consequences that were invisible before. You recognize patterns that were hidden from you at the time. And because of this, you judge that version of yourself as if it had the same awareness you have now. This is where the inner conflict begins. You are measuring your past with your present wisdom. And that measurement is never fair. The person you were then did not have access to the clarity you have now. They were moving through life with a different level of understanding, shaped by their experiences, their fears, their conditioning, and their limitations. They were doing the best they could with what they had, even if that best was not enough to create the outcome you wanted. This is not an excuse, it is a recognition of reality. Compassion begins here, not by denying the mistake, but by seeing the conditions in which it was made. When you look at your younger self, you can begin to notice what was influencing you at that time. the emotions you were carrying, the beliefs you held, the pressures you felt, the things you had not yet learned. All of these shaped your actions, often in ways you were not fully aware of. Without this understanding, it is easy to reduce everything to a single judgment, to say, "I was wrong," and leave it at that. But that kind of judgment is incomplete. It does not account for the full picture. It does not allow for growth. Compassion does not mean you agree with what happened. It means you understand how it happened. There is a difference. Understanding brings space. Judgment closes it. When you judge your younger self, you create a divide between who you were and who you are now. You push that version away as if it does not belong to you. But in doing so, you also reject a part of your own story. You fragment your experience, holding on to only the parts that feel acceptable while trying to distance yourself from the rest. This creates tension because the past does not disappear when you reject it. It remains unresolved, waiting to be seen differently. Compassion allows integration. It allows you to bring that version of yourself closer, not to relive what happened, but to understand it fully. To see that even in your mistakes, there was an attempt to navigate life with the tools you had. This changes the relationship. Instead of seeing your younger self as someone who failed, you begin to see them as someone who was learning. Instead of seeing them as careless, you begin to see the uncertainty they were dealing with. Instead of seeing them as harmful, you begin to see the confusion or pain that may have been driving their actions. This does not erase responsibility, it deepens it. Because true responsibility includes awareness of the conditions that shaped your behavior, not just the outcome. When you see this clearly, something softens. The harsh voice that has been judging begins to lose its intensity. It no longer feels necessary to keep repeating the same criticism because you are starting to understand what was not visible before. There is also a shift in how you relate to your own growth. When you practice compassion, you begin to recognize that the person you are now is the result of everything you have experienced, including the mistakes. The awareness you have today did not come from perfection. It came from moments where things did not go as planned, where you had to reflect, adjust, and learn. In this way, your younger self becomes part of your development, not something separate from it. This perspective allows you to hold your past with more balance. You can acknowledge what went wrong without collapsing into it. You can see the impact without turning it into a permanent identity. You can carry the lesson without carrying the weight. Another important aspect of compassion is how it changes your internal dialogue. The way you speak to yourself matters. When the mind returns to a past moment, it often brings a tone of criticism. It says things like, "You should have known," or "That was your fault," or "You were not good enough." These thoughts create distance and tension. But when compassion is present, the tone shifts. It becomes quieter, more understanding. It might say, "You did not see clearly then," or "You were trying to handle something difficult," or "You have learned since that moment." This does not remove accountability. It removes unnecessary harm. Because the goal is not to avoid truth. It is to approach truth in a way that allows growth, not self-destruction. Compassion also opens the door to forgiveness, not in a forced or artificial way, but as a natural result of understanding. When you see your younger self clearly, without distortion, you begin to recognize that holding on to blame is no longer needed. You have already seen what happened. You have already felt the impact. There is nothing more to gain from continuing to punish. At this point, letting go becomes possible, not because you are ignoring the past, but because you are no longer holding on to it in the same way. There is a quiet release, a sense that you can finally put something down. This does not mean you forget. It means you remember without pain controlling the experience. You remember with clarity, with context, with a sense of completion, and from that place you move forward differently. You carry the lesson into your present actions. You respond with more awareness. You choose with more intention, not because you are trying to prove something, but because you see more clearly. This is the true function of compassion. It does not weaken your sense of responsibility. It strengthens your ability to act wisely. It allows you to be honest without being harsh. It allows you to grow without being trapped in what has already passed. And as this understanding becomes more stable, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you start to see your younger self with compassion, there may still be a deeper pattern influencing how you relate to your past. A pattern that quietly shapes how you see yourself, not just in one moment, but across many. A pattern that turns a single experience into something much larger than it needs to be. And as that compassion begins to soften the way you see your past, something unexpected starts to reveal itself. You may notice that even when you understand what happened, even when you can look at your younger self with more kindness, there is still a lingering feeling that does not fully let go. It is quieter than blame, but heavier than regret. It does not always speak in words, but you can feel it in how you carry yourself, in how you hesitate, in how you shrink in certain moments without knowing why. This is where something deeper has been forming all along. Because sometimes it is not the mistake that stays with you, it is the identity you built around it. And once that identity forms, it begins to shape everything, even when the moment itself is long gone. Let's go deeper. There is a powerful shift that happens in the mind when an experience becomes personal in a very specific way. At first, something happens. You make a mistake. You say something you wish you could take back. You act in a way that does not align with who you are now. That moment passes, but the mind does not just store the memory. It attaches meaning to it. It begins to interpret what that moment says about you, not just what you did, but who you are. And this is where shame enters. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt focuses on actions. It says, I did something wrong. Shame focuses on identity. It says, there is something wrong with me. This difference may seem small, but it changes everything. Because when the mind shifts from action to identity, it stops seeing the event as something that happened and starts seeing it as something that defines you. That single moment becomes a reference point, a label begins to form, and once that label is accepted, even quietly, it starts to influence how you see yourself in every other moment. You may not notice it at first. It can be subtle. You hold back from speaking honestly, not because of what is happening now, but because you remember a time when your words caused harm. You doubt your intentions, not because you lack awareness, but because you remember a time when your choices led to consequences you did not expect. You hesitate to trust yourself, not because you are incapable, but because one experience has been used as proof that you cannot be trusted. This is how a single moment expands beyond its actual size. It stops being one part of your life. It becomes a lens through which you view your entire self. The mind does this because it seeks consistency. It wants to make sense of things quickly, to categorize, to create patterns. When something painful happens, it tries to prevent it from happening again by creating a strong association. But in doing so, it often overgeneralizes. It takes one moment and turns it into a story. And that story becomes something you carry. The problem is not the story itself. It is the fact that you begin to believe it. Once you believe it, you stop questioning it. It becomes the background of your thoughts, the quiet assumption that shapes your behavior. You may not say it out loud, but it is there. I am not good at this. I always mess things up. I am not the kind of person who gets things right. These beliefs do not come from who you are now. They come from a moment that has been stretched far beyond its truth. Shame works in silence. It does not need to be loud to be powerful. It shows up in how you limit yourself, in how you interpret situations, in how you respond to opportunities. It tells you that you need to be careful, to hold back, to protect yourself from becoming that version of yourself again. But in doing so, it also prevents you from becoming something new, because you are still tied to something old. The deeper challenge with shame is that it feels personal. Guilt can be released once you understand and take responsibility, but shame feels like it is part of you. It feels like removing it would mean removing something essential. So instead of letting it go, you carry it. You adjust your behavior around it. You try to avoid situations that might bring it up again. And slowly, your world becomes smaller. Not because you are incapable, but because you are still protecting yourself from an identity that no longer needs to exist. There is also a hidden reinforcement cycle that keeps shame alive. Every time you act from that identity, it strengthens. If you hesitate, it confirms the belief that you are not confident. If you avoid something, it confirms the belief that you are not capable. If you hold back, it confirms the belief that you are not ready. This creates a loop. The identity shapes your actions, and your actions reinforce the identity. And because this happens over time, it starts to feel true. But truth is not determined by repetition. It is determined by clarity. And clarity comes when you begin to question the origin of that identity. You ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Often, the answer leads back to a single moment, or a small number of moments that have been given too much power. When you see this clearly, something shifts. You realize that what you have been calling your identity is actually a conclusion formed in a moment of limited awareness. And like any conclusion, it can be revisited. This does not mean you deny what happened. It means you place it in the right context. You see it as part of your experience, not the definition of your existence. You begin to separate the event from the identity. You say, that was something I experienced, not something I am. This distinction creates space. It allows you to see yourself more fully, not just through one moment, but through everything you have learned since. There is also a shift in how you respond to that memory when it arises. Instead of immediately identifying with it, you observe it. You notice the feeling, the thought, the tendency to contract, and instead of following it, you stay present. This weakens the connection between the memory and the identity. Over time, the intensity begins to fade, not because the memory disappears, but because it no longer holds the same meaning. It becomes one part of a much larger picture. And in that larger picture, you are not defined by a single point. You are a process. You are evolving, learning, adjusting. The version of you that made that mistake is not the same as the one reflecting on it now, and the one you are becoming is not limited by either. This is where freedom begins to expand, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to let it define your present identity. Shame loses its power when it is seen clearly. When it is brought into awareness, it cannot operate in the same way. It no longer feels like an unquestioned truth. It becomes something you can examine, understand, and eventually release. This does not happen instantly. It is a gradual process. Each time you notice the pattern and choose not to reinforce it, you take a step away from that identity. Each time you act from your present awareness instead of your past label, you create something new. And slowly, the old identity loses its grip. You begin to feel more open, more capable, more aligned with who you are now, rather than who you believed you were. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to yourself without the layers that were built from misunderstanding. And as this becomes clearer, another realization begins to surface. Because even when you start to loosen the identity created by shame, there is still a deeper belief that keeps you connected to the past. a belief that tells you that something is still owed, that something must still be paid. And as that false identity begins to loosen, something even more subtle comes into view. You may start to feel a quiet pressure that has been there all along, something that does not speak loudly, yet quietly directs how you live, how you think, and how you treat yourself. It feels like something is still unfinished, like something is still owed, not to someone else, but to the past itself. It shows up as a constant need to make up for what happened, to balance something that feels out of place, to prove in some way that you are not that person anymore. And even when no one is asking anything from you, you continue to carry this invisible responsibility. This is where the weight becomes deeper than regret or shame, because now it feels like a debt. And until you see this clearly, you will keep trying to pay something that does not exist. Let's go deeper. There is a strange pattern the mind creates when it cannot fully accept what has already happened. It builds a quiet belief that something must still be corrected, something must still be balanced, something must still be repaid. This belief does not always appear as a clear thought. It often lives beneath the surface, shaping your behavior without needing to explain itself. It feels like a silent obligation. You might notice it in the way you hold yourself back from feeling joy, as if you have not earned it yet. You might see it in how you push yourself harder than necessary, not out of growth, but out of a need to compensate. You might feel it in the constant effort to be better, not because you are inspired, but because you are trying to fix something that already belongs to the past. This is how the mind creates a debt, not through reality, but through perception. At some point, something happened that did not align with your values, your intentions, or your expectations. Instead of allowing that moment to be understood and integrated, the mind assigned a cost to it. It decided, often unconsciously, that you must pay for it. Not with money, not with external actions, but with your own peace. You pay with hesitation. You pay with self-doubt. You pay by denying yourself the freedom to move forward without weight. This is not something anyone asked you to do. It is something you created in an attempt to restore balance. But the balance you are trying to restore does not exist in the way you think it does. The past is complete. The event has already unfolded. There is nothing left to change within it. Yet the mind continues to act as if there is an open account. It keeps returning, keeps calculating, keeps asking, have I done enough to make up for it? And the answer never feels complete, because the mind is trying to resolve something that cannot be resolved through effort. It is trying to change a fixed moment through ongoing compensation. This creates a cycle. You act in ways that are meant to correct the past, but since the past does not change, the feeling of incompletion remains. And because the feeling remains, the mind continues the effort. This is how the debt stays alive. Not because it is real, but because it is constantly being reinforced. There is also a deeper emotional layer to this pattern. Sometimes, the idea of owing something to the past feels like a form of control. It gives you the sense that you are actively doing something about what happened. It tells you that you are not ignoring it, that you are not avoiding responsibility, that you are taking action. But this action is directed in the wrong place. It is directed backward, towards something that cannot respond. True resolution does not come from paying a debt to the past. It comes from changing how you relate to the present. Another aspect of this pattern is how it shapes your sense of worth. If you believe you owe something, then your value becomes conditional. You begin to feel that you must earn your right to feel at peace. You must prove that you are no longer the person who made that mistake. You must show, through your actions, that you deserve to move forward. This creates a subtle form of self-restriction. You limit your happiness. You question your progress. You hesitate to fully step into your life, not because you are incapable, but because you are still trying to complete a payment that has no clear end. And because there is no clear end, it continues indefinitely. This is one of the most hidden forms of suffering. It does not look like obvious pain. It looks like effort. It looks like responsibility. It looks like someone who is trying to do better. But beneath it, there is a quiet exhaustion. Because no matter how much you do, it never feels like enough. The shift begins when you question the existence of the debt itself. You ask yourself, who is asking me to pay this? Often, the answer is silence. There is no one waiting. There is no external demand. There is only a belief that has been carried for so long that it feels real. When you see this, something begins to change. You realize that you have been holding yourself to a standard that no one else has set. You have been continuing a process that no longer serves any purpose. And this realization creates space. It allows you to step back from the pattern, not by forcing it to stop, but by seeing that it is not necessary. From this place, you can begin to redirect your energy. Instead of trying to fix the past, you focus on how you live now. Instead of trying to prove something, you act from what you understand. Instead of trying to repay something, you allow yourself to move forward. This does not mean you ignore what happened. It means you stop relating to it as an unfinished obligation. You begin to see it as part of your path, something that has already contributed to your growth. There is also a sense of release that comes with this shift. You no longer feel the need to carry something into every moment. You no longer measure your actions against a past event. You begin to act with more freedom, more clarity, more presence. Because your energy is no longer tied to something behind you. It is available here. And when your energy is here, your choices become different. You respond with awareness instead of compensation. You move forward with intention instead of obligation. You begin to experience life without the constant background of something that needs to be paid. This is where a deeper kind of peace begins to emerge. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer trying to resolve something that has already ended. And as this understanding settles, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you let go of the idea of a debt, there is still a deeper question that often remains, a question about who you were at that time and whether you should have known better. And the answer to that question holds the key to an even greater sense of freedom. And as that invisible debt begins to dissolve, something even more honest rises to the surface. A quiet question you may have been avoiding without even realizing it. A question that has shaped how you judge yourself all this time. Why didn't I know better? It sounds simple, but it carries a heavy weight, because behind it is the belief that you should have been different, wiser, more aware than you actually were. And as long as that belief stays unchallenged, it quietly keeps you tied to the past. But what if that belief is not true? What if the person you were then could only act from the awareness they had at that moment? There is something deeply relieving about this realization, but also something difficult. Because it asks you to see yourself in a way you may not be used to. Not through judgment, but through understanding. Let's go deeper. There is a tendency in the mind to look backward with the clarity of the present and assume that clarity should have existed in the past. You look at a decision, a reaction, or a moment, and you see all the things that could have been done differently. The mistakes become obvious. The better choices seem clear. But this clarity is new. It was not available to you then. At that time, your understanding was shaped by everything you had experienced up to that point. Your beliefs, your fears, your emotional state, your level of knowledge, all of these came together to form the awareness you were acting from. You did not have the perspective you have now. You did not have the same insight. You did not have the same level of reflection. Yet the mind holds you accountable as if you did. This creates an unfair comparison. You are measuring your past self with your present awareness. And no matter how you look at it, Your past self will always fall short of that standard, because growth has already happened. You are not the same person. The awareness you have now is the result of everything you have gone through, including the moments you regret. It is built on those experiences. Without them, you would not see things the way you do today. This changes how you interpret the past. Instead of seeing it as a failure to be better, you begin to see it as a stage in your development, a point in your journey where you were doing the best you could with the understanding you had. This does not mean every choice was right. It means every choice came from a certain level of awareness, and that awareness had limits. When you accept this, something begins to soften. The harshness of your judgment starts to lose its intensity. You no longer feel the need to ask why you were not different, because you begin to see that you could not have been. This is not about removing responsibility. It is about placing it in the right place. Responsibility belongs to the present. It lives in how you respond now, with the awareness you have gained, holding your past self to your current level of. Understanding does not create growth. It creates suffering. It keeps you stuck in a comparison that cannot be resolved. There is also a deeper shift that happens when you truly see this. You begin to feel a sense of compassion that is grounded in reality. Not forced, not artificial, but natural. You look at your past actions and recognize that they were part of a process of learning, of adjusting, of becoming more aware. You see the limitations you had, not as flaws, but as part of being human. Everyone moves through life with incomplete understanding. Everyone makes choices that they later see differently. This is how awareness expands. It is not something you are born with fully formed. It develops over time, through experience, through reflection, through moments that challenge you. When you recognize this, the pressure to have been perfect disappears. You stop expecting your past self to have had knowledge that only came later. This releases a significant amount of tension. You are no longer fighting against something that cannot be changed. You are no longer holding on to an expectation that was never realistic. Another important aspect of this realization is how it affects your sense of identity. When you believe you should have known better, you often attach a sense of failure to your past actions. You see them as evidence that something is wrong with you, but when you understand that you were acting from limited awareness, that interpretation begins to change. The actions are no longer proof of who you are. They are reflections of where you were, and where you were is not where you are now. This distinction creates freedom. It allows you to separate your identity from your past behavior. You are not defined by what you did when you knew less. You are shaped by how you have grown since then. This shift also changes how you relate to your future. If you accept that your past self acted from the awareness available at that time, you begin to trust that your present self is doing the same. You stop demanding perfection from yourself. You stop expecting to have all the answers. Instead, you focus on being as aware as you can be now, and you trust that as your awareness continues to grow, your actions will naturally reflect that growth. This creates a more balanced way of living. You are no longer trapped between regret and expectation. You are present. You are engaged. You are learning as you go. There is also a sense of humility that comes with this understanding. You recognize that just as you were limited in the past, you may also be limited now in ways you cannot yet see. This does not create fear. It creates openness. You become more willing to reflect, to adjust, to learn, not because you are trying to avoid mistakes, but because you understand that growth is ongoing. You are part of a process, not a fixed identity, not a finished version. This perspective brings a kind of peace that is not dependent on perfection. It allows you to accept your past without needing to change it. It allows you to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. And it allows you to be with yourself in a way that is honest and compassionate at the same time. The more you sit with this realization, the more natural it becomes. You begin to notice when the mind tries to pull you back into judgment. You see the pattern. You recognize that it is based on a comparison that no longer makes sense, and instead of following it, you return to what is true, that you acted from the awareness you had then, and that awareness has already changed. This is where freedom begins to deepen, not as an idea but as an experience, a sense that you are no longer bound to the past in the same way, that you can remember without reliving, that you can acknowledge without attaching, that you can grow without punishing. And as this becomes clearer, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you start to release judgment and understand your past more fully, there is still a way the present can feel heavy. Not because of what happened, but because of how much you continue to carry into it. And as that understanding settles, a quiet truth begins to surface. You start to notice that even though you have seen your past more clearly, even though you have softened the judgment and released the idea of a debt, something still feels heavy at times. It is not coming from what is happening now. It is coming from what you are still carrying into now. Because the present moment does not only hold what is here, it also holds what you bring into it. And without realizing it, you may still be bringing old versions of yourself into spaces where they no longer belong. This is where the weight lingers, not in the past itself, but in how it continues to live through you. Let's go deeper. There is a way the mind moves through time that is often invisible. You may be physically present, standing in a room, having a conversation, going through your day, but internally, something else is happening. You are not just responding to what is in front of you. You are responding as someone you used to be. This happens quietly. You walk into a situation and feel hesitation, not because of anything happening now, but because of something that once happened in a similar space. You hold back your words, not because they are unclear, but because you remember a time when speaking led to discomfort. You doubt your choices, not because they are wrong, but because you are still carrying a memory of getting it wrong before. This is how the past enters the present, not as a clear memory, but as a subtle influence. It shapes your reactions before you have time to think. It colors your perception before you see things as they are. It creates a layer between you and the moment. And that layer is made of old versions of yourself. Each version holds a different story. One version remembers a time you felt rejected. Another remembers a time you felt embarrassed. Another remembers a time you made a decision that led to regret. These versions are not active in reality, but they remain active in your mind. And when you bring them into the present, they begin to shape how you experience what is happening now. This is where the weight comes from. You are not just living one moment, you are carrying many. The present becomes crowded. It becomes layered with past interpretations, past emotions, past identities. And because of this, it loses its clarity. You are no longer seeing things as they are. You are seeing them through what has been. This creates a distortion. A conversation feels heavier than it needs to be. A decision feels more complicated than it actually is. A simple moment feels charged with emotion that does not belong to it. This is not because the present is difficult. It is because the past is still being carried into it. There is also a subtle tension that comes from trying to manage these old versions of yourself. You may not even notice it, but part of your energy is constantly focused on avoiding becoming that version again. You monitor your behavior, you adjust your responses, you hold back parts of yourself, all in an attempt to prevent a repetition of what has already happened. This creates effort, and that effort becomes weight, because instead of moving freely, you are moving carefully. Instead of responding naturally, you are filtering everything through a past experience. This limits your presence. It keeps you from fully engaging with what is in front of you. There is also a deeper effect on your sense of self. When you carry old versions of yourself into the present, you create confusion about who you are. Are you the person you were then, or are you the person you are now? The mind blends the two together. It holds on to outdated definitions. It responds to current situations with old conclusions. And this creates inconsistency. You may feel capable in one moment and doubtful in the next. You may feel confident in one situation and uncertain in another. Not because your ability has changed, but because different versions of yourself are influencing your experience. This fragmentation makes it difficult to feel stable. It keeps you from experiencing yourself as you are now. The shift begins when you recognize that these old versions are not who you are in this moment. They are memories. They are impressions. They are patterns that were formed under different conditions, but they are not your current reality. When you see this clearly, something begins to separate. You start to notice when an old version is entering the present. You feel the hesitation, the doubt, the familiar emotional tone, and instead of identifying with it, you observe it. You recognize that this reaction belongs to a different time. This creates space. And in that space, you have a choice. You can continue to respond from that old version, or you can return to who you are now. This does not mean you ignore the past. It means you stop letting it lead. You allow the present to be what it is, without adding layers that do not belong. This requires awareness, not constant effort, but a gentle noticing. Each time you catch yourself reacting from an old pattern, you bring your attention back to your breath, back to your body, back to what is actually happening. This grounds you, it reconnects you to the present. Over time, this becomes more natural. The gap between the past and the present becomes clearer. You no longer confuse the two, and as this clarity grows, the weight begins to lift. Because you are no longer carrying multiple versions of yourself into each moment. You are simply here, responding from your current awareness, acting from your present understanding. This also changes how you experience time. Instead of feeling like you are constantly looking backward while trying to move forward, you begin to feel aligned. Your attention is where your life is happening. This brings a sense of ease, a sense of lightness. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer adding unnecessary weight to it. There is also a sense of renewal that comes with this. Each moment becomes an opportunity to be new. Not in the sense of forgetting everything, but in the sense of not being defined by what has already passed. You are free to respond differently, free to act with the awareness you have now, free to experience life without the constant influence of outdated versions of yourself. This is where the present regains its simplicity. It becomes clear, it becomes manageable, it becomes something you can fully engage with without being pulled in different directions. And as this understanding deepens, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you start to release the weight of old versions of yourself, there is still a question that often remains. A question about what it really means to forgive yourself and whether doing so changes the meaning of what happened. And as the present begins to feel lighter, as you stop carrying those old versions of yourself into every moment, another question quietly rises. It does not come from confusion, it comes from caution. A part of you hesitates because letting go feels close now, freedom feels possible. But something inside resists the final step. It whispers something that sounds reasonable. If I forgive myself, does that mean what I did no longer matters? This is where many people stop, not because they cannot heal, but because they misunderstand what forgiveness truly is. And until this is seen clearly, you may keep holding on to pain, not because you need to, but because you believe you should. Let's go deeper. There is a deep fear hidden inside the idea of self-forgiveness. It feels like a loss of moral ground. It feels like stepping away from responsibility. It feels like saying, it was okay, even when you know it was not. This is why many people hold on to guilt and regret for far longer than necessary. They believe that releasing those feelings would mean dismissing the impact of their actions. But forgiveness is not denial. It does not erase what happened. It does not rewrite the past. It does not pretend that harm did not occur or that mistakes were harmless. Forgiveness changes something else. It changes how you carry what has already happened. There is a difference between acknowledging truth and continuing to punish yourself for it. One is clarity, the other is suffering. When you do not forgive yourself, you often think you are honoring the seriousness of what happened. You believe that by holding on to pain, you are showing that you understand the weight of your actions. But pain is not the only way to show understanding. Awareness is, growth is, change is. You can fully recognize the impact of your past without continuing to harm yourself in the present. This is where the misunderstanding begins to dissolve. Forgiving yourself does not mean you are saying, it was fine. It means you are saying, it happened, I understand it, and I will not continue to hurt myself because of it. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Without forgiveness, the mind keeps you tied to the past through judgment. It replays the moment, not to learn, but to reinforce a sense of wrongdoing. It keeps the emotional charge alive, as if holding on to it is necessary. But over time, this does not deepen your understanding. It only deepens your suffering. There is also a belief that punishment leads to growth, that if you are hard on yourself, you will avoid making the same mistake again. This belief feels logical, but it is often misleading. Punishment does not create clarity, it creates fear, and actions driven by fear are not the same as actions driven by awareness. When you act out of fear, you are trying to avoid pain. When you act out of awareness, you are responding with understanding. These are very different motivations. One limits you, the other expands you. Forgiveness allows you to move from fear to awareness. It removes the constant pressure of needing to avoid being that person again. Instead, it allows you to focus on who you are becoming now. This creates a different kind of responsibility, not one based on self-criticism, but one based on conscious choice. You begin to act differently, not because you are afraid of repeating the past, but because you see clearly what leads to better outcomes. This clarity is more stable. It does not depend on constant emotional reinforcement. It comes from understanding, not from punishment. There is also an important emotional release that comes with forgiveness. When you stop holding on to judgment, the emotional intensity around the memory begins to soften. It does not disappear instantly, but it loses its grip. You can remember without being overwhelmed. You can reflect without being pulled back into the same state. This allows the past to settle, not as something unresolved, but as something integrated. Integration is different from avoidance. Avoidance pushes things away. Integration allows them to be part of your story without dominating it. This is where true healing happens. Another layer of this process involves how you relate to your own humanity. Forgiveness acknowledges that you are capable of making mistakes, of acting without full awareness, of learning through experience. It recognizes that imperfection is not a flaw in your existence, it is part of your growth. When you resist forgiveness, you often hold yourself to a standard that does not allow for this reality. You expect yourself to have always known better, to have always acted correctly, to have avoided every misstep. But this expectation is not realistic. It does not reflect how growth actually happens. Growth includes moments of error. It includes decisions that later appear differently. It includes learning through experience, not just through theory. Forgiveness aligns you with this truth. It allows you to accept that your path included these moments and that they contributed to who you are now. This does not glorify mistakes. It places them in context. It sees them as part of a process, not as permanent definitions. There is also a shift in how you treat yourself moving forward. When you forgive yourself, you create a more supportive internal environment. Your thoughts become less harsh. Your reactions become more balanced. Your relationship with yourself becomes more stable. This does not make you passive. It makes you more grounded. You are able to face challenges without adding unnecessary layers of self-criticism. You are able to reflect without collapsing into judgment. You are able to grow without carrying constant emotional weight. This stability supports better decisions. It allows you to respond with clarity instead of reacting from old patterns. It creates space for new ways of being. Forgiveness also removes the need to constantly revisit the past. When the mind no longer feels the need to punish, it stops returning to the same moment in the same way. The repetition fades. This frees up mental energy that can now be directed toward the present, toward what you are creating now, toward how you are living now. This shift is important because your life is not happening in the past. It is happening here. And the more you release what no longer needs to be carried, the more available you become to your own life. There is also a deeper sense of peace that comes with this, not because everything is resolved in a perfect way, but because you are no longer in conflict with yourself. The inner tension begins to ease. You stop fighting your own history. You stop trying to change what cannot be changed. You begin to accept. And acceptance creates calm. It allows you to move forward without resistance. It allows you to be present without distraction. It allows you to live without the constant background of something unfinished. This does not mean you forget. It means you remember differently, with clarity, with understanding, with a sense of completion. And as this understanding settles, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when forgiveness becomes clearer, there is still a deeper role the past can play in your life, not as something that holds you back, but as something that can guide you forward in a very different way. And as forgiveness begins to settle, something unexpected starts to change in the way you relate to everything behind you. The past no longer feels like something chasing you, but something standing still. It is no longer pulling you backward, yet it is not completely gone either. It is still there, but quieter. And this is where a deeper question begins to form. If the past is no longer here to punish you, then what is it here for? Because once the weight starts to lift, you begin to see that the past was never meant to be carried as a burden. It was meant to serve a different purpose entirely, a purpose most people never discover. Let's go deeper. There is a way of holding the past that feels heavy, restrictive, and constant. In that way of holding it, every memory becomes something to guard against. Every mistake becomes something to avoid repeating at all costs. Every regret becomes a warning that follows you into new situations. In this state, the past behaves like a prison guard. It watches you, it monitors your behavior, it limits your movement. You may not notice it directly, but it shows up in how you hold yourself back, how you hesitate, how you question your choices before you even make them. You are not living freely. You are living carefully. And that carefulness is driven by fear. Fear of becoming that version of yourself again. Fear of repeating something that once caused pain. Fear of stepping into the unknown because the past has convinced you that mistakes carry too high a cost. But this is not the only way the past can exist in your life. There is another way, a way that does not restrict you but guides you, a way that does not control you but informs you. This is where the past becomes a teacher. The difference between a prison guard and a teacher is subtle but powerful. A prison guard keeps you in place. A teacher helps you move forward. A prison guard reminds you of what went wrong and keeps you focused on avoiding it. A teacher shows you what you have learned and helps you apply it with clarity. When the past is a prison guard, it keeps you tied to fear. When it becomes a teacher, it connects you to awareness. This shift changes everything. Instead of asking, "How do I avoid making the same mistake again?" you begin to ask, "What did I understand from that experience, and how does it guide me now?" This question moves your attention forward. It takes the energy that was once used for avoidance and turns it into something constructive. You begin to act with intention instead of hesitation. You begin to respond with clarity instead of fear. This does not mean you ignore the past. It means you relate to it differently. You allow it to inform your decisions, but you do not allow it to control them. There is also a change in how you experience uncertainty. When the past acts as a prison guard, uncertainty feels dangerous. It reminds you of moments where things did not go as planned, and it pushes you to stay within what feels safe. But when the past becomes a teacher, uncertainty feels like an opportunity. Not because you expect everything to go perfectly, but because you trust your ability to respond. You trust your awareness. You trust your growth. This trust does not come from perfection. It comes from experience. You have seen what happens when things do not go as expected. You have reflected on those moments. You have learned from them. And now that learning becomes part of how you move forward. This is where confidence begins to grow, not as a belief that nothing will go wrong, but as a quiet knowing that whatever happens, you will meet it with awareness. Another important aspect of this shift is how it changes your relationship with mistakes. When the past is a prison guard, mistakes feel like threats. They are something to be avoided at all costs. They carry a heavy emotional charge because they are linked to past experiences that were difficult. But when the past becomes a teacher, mistakes take on a different role. They become part of the learning process. They are no longer seen as failures, but as information. They show you what works and what does not. They reveal patterns. They highlight areas where awareness can deepen. This does not make mistakes pleasant, but it removes the fear that often surrounds them. You become more open to experience, more willing to engage, more present in what you are doing, because you are not constantly trying to protect yourself from something that has already happened. There is also a shift in how you hold your own story. When the past acts as a prison guard, your story feels fixed, defined by certain moments, limited by certain outcomes. You see yourself through those events, and they shape how you think about your future. But when the past becomes a teacher, your story becomes fluid. It is not defined by a single moment. It is shaped by everything you have learned. You begin to see yourself as someone who is evolving, not someone who is stuck. This creates a sense of movement, a sense that your life is unfolding, not repeating. And this changes how you approach each day. You are no longer carrying a script written by the past. You are writing something new, informed by what you have learned, but not controlled by it. There is also a deeper sense of acceptance that comes with this. When you see the past as a teacher, you stop resisting it. You stop wishing it had been different. You stop trying to rewrite it. You begin to see that it played a role in your development, that it contributed to your awareness, that it helped shape your understanding. This does not mean you would choose to experience everything again, but it means you can accept that it happened without needing to fight it. Acceptance does not remove the memory, it removes the struggle. And when the struggle is gone, the memory loses its power. It becomes part of your experience, not something that dominates it. There is also a practical aspect to this shift. When the past is a teacher, you can use it in a focused way. You reflect when necessary. You take the lesson, and then you return to the present. You do not stay there longer than needed. You do not revisit it without purpose. You use it, and then you move on. This keeps your attention grounded. It prevents the mind from drifting into repetition. It allows you to stay connected to what is happening now. And this is where life actually unfolds. Not in reflection alone, but in action, in presence, in awareness. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You begin to notice when the mind tries to turn the past into a prison again. You feel the shift, the tension, the hesitation. And instead of following it, you gently return to what you have learned. You remind yourself that the past is not here to control you. It is here to guide you. This reminder brings you back to the present, back to your awareness, back to your ability to respond. And as this becomes more stable, something else begins to reveal itself. Because even when you start to relate to the past as a teacher, there is still a pattern that can pull you back into unnecessary suffering. A pattern that has less to do with the past itself, and more to do with how often you return to it, even when there is nothing left to learn. And as that understanding settles, something subtle begins to reveal itself. You start to notice that even when the past has already taught you what it needed to teach, the mind still returns to it, not for clarity, not for growth, but out of habit. It feels almost automatic. You find yourself revisiting moments that no longer hold new answers, reopening conversations that have already ended, replaying scenes that have already given you everything they could. And each time you go back, something inside you tightens, even though nothing new is being added. This is where suffering quietly grows, not because the past is still active, but because the mind keeps bringing it back to life. Let's go deeper. There is a natural point where an experience completes itself. The moment happens, the emotions move through, the lesson becomes clear, and the mind has everything it needs to move forward. At this point, the door to that experience is meant to close, not to erase it, but to allow it to rest. But the mind does not always trust closure. It often believes there is more to uncover, more to understand, more to resolve, so it returns. It opens the same door again, looks around, searches for something new, and finds nothing. Yet instead of recognizing that the process is complete, it continues. This repetition creates an illusion of importance. It makes it feel like the experience is still unfinished, even when it is not. Each time the door is reopened, the emotional imprint is activated again. The body reacts, the thoughts return, the same feelings rise to the surface. And because the experience feels real in that moment, it reinforces the belief that there is still something to deal with. But there isn't. What is being repeated is not the event, it is the memory. And the memory is being fed by attention. This is where the pattern becomes clear. The mind is not suffering because of what happened. It is suffering because it keeps returning to what has already ended. There is a difference between reflecting on something with purpose and returning to it without reason. Purposeful reflection has direction, it seeks understanding, and once that understanding is reached, it naturally comes to a stop. But habitual returning has no direction. It loops, it repeats, it stays in motion without moving forward. This creates a cycle that feels difficult to break. You think about it again, hoping this time it will feel different. You analyze it from another angle, hoping something new will appear. But each time, you arrive at the same place. And this repetition deepens the emotional response. The more you revisit the memory, the more familiar it becomes. And familiarity, even when it is painful, creates a strange sense of comfort. The mind begins to associate that state with something known. It becomes a pattern. This is why it can feel difficult to let go. Not because the experience itself is unresolved, but because the pattern of returning to it has become ingrained. There is also a deeper belief that keeps this cycle alive. The idea that if you stop thinking about it, you are avoiding it. This belief creates pressure. It tells you that you must continue to revisit the past in order to fully deal with it. But this is not always true. There is a point where continued revisiting no longer serves a purpose. it becomes unnecessary. And recognizing that point is part of wisdom. Letting something rest is not avoidance, it is completion. It is the recognition that the mind has done its work and now it is time to move on. But the mind resists this. It fears that if it lets go, it might lose something important. It might forget the lesson. It might become careless again. So it keeps the door open, just in case. This just in case becomes a quiet form of attachment. It keeps you connected to something that no longer needs your attention. And each time you return, you reinforce that connection. This is how suffering grows, not through new events, but through repeated engagement with old ones. There is also a physical component to this. The body does not distinguish between a real experience and a vividly remembered one. When the mind replays a moment, the body responds as if it is happening now. The same tension, the same emotional reaction, the same physiological response. This means that each time you reopen that door, you are not just thinking about the past, you are re-experiencing it. This keeps the emotional imprint active. It prevents the system from settling. It maintains a state of alertness that no longer has a real cause. Over time, this can create a sense of exhaustion, a feeling that something is always present, always unresolved, even when there is nothing new happening. This is the cost of repeated reopening. It drains your energy. It limits your presence. It keeps your attention divided between what is here and what is no longer here. The shift begins with awareness. You start to notice when the mind is returning without purpose. You feel the familiar pull. You recognize the pattern, and instead of following it automatically, you pause. This pause is important. It creates a space between the impulse and the action. In that space, you can choose. You can ask yourself, is there something new to understand here? If the answer is no, then you allow the door to remain closed. You do not force it shut. You simply do not reopen it. This is a gentle process. It does not require resistance. It requires recognition. Each time you choose not to engage, you weaken the pattern. Each time you allow the memory to pass without entering it, you create distance. Over time, the pull becomes less strong. The mind begins to settle. The need to return fades. There is also a sense of relief that comes with this. You realize that you do not have to keep revisiting something to honor it. You do not have to keep feeling it to show that it mattered. You can let it rest. And in letting it rest, you create space for the present. This space is where clarity lives, where awareness can function without interference, where you can engage with life as it is, not as it was. This does not mean the past disappears. It means it is no longer active in the same way. It becomes part of your memory, not part of your current experience. This is where peace begins to deepen, not through control, but through release, not through effort, but through understanding. And as this understanding becomes more stable, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you stop reopening closed doors, there is still a pattern that can trigger the same reactions, even without conscious thought. A pattern that lives deeper in the body and mind, shaped by repetition, and often activated before you even realize it. And as you begin to leave those closed doors untouched, something else becomes clear. Even when you stop going back on purpose, even when you no longer want to relive what has already ended, your body still reacts. A feeling rises before a thought appears. A tightness forms before you can explain it. A reaction shows up that does not seem to belong to who you are now. And this creates confusion, because your mind understands something your body has not yet released. This is where many people feel stuck again, not because they are doing anything wrong, but because something deeper is still responding to an old story, even after the wisdom has changed. Let's go deeper. There are two parts of you that do not always move at the same pace. Your awareness can change quickly. You can reflect, understand, and see things differently in a short period of time. You can recognize that the past is over, that you have learned, that you no longer need to carry the same weight. But your nervous system moves differently. It does not change through thinking alone. It changes through experience, repetition, and time. This means you can know something is no longer true, yet still feel as if it is. This is why your body reacts. It has been conditioned by past experiences. At some point, something happened that created a strong emotional response. The body learned from that moment. It stored the sensation, the tension, the alertness, and it connected it to certain situations, certain environments, certain triggers. This learning is not based on logic. It is based on survival. The nervous system is designed to protect you. It does not wait for your mind to analyze. It reacts first, then allows the mind to catch up. So when something in the present resembles something from the past, even slightly, the body responds. Not because the situation is the same, but because it feels similar. This is where the disconnect happens. Your mind says, "This is different. I understand now. I am not in that situation anymore." But your body says, "This feels familiar. Stay alert." And the reaction appears. Your heart rate changes. Your breathing shifts. Your muscles tighten. Your thoughts begin to follow the sensation. And suddenly, it feels like you have gone backward. But you have not. You are simply experiencing a response that has not yet updated. This is important to understand, because without this awareness, you may start to judge yourself again. You may think, "Why am I still reacting like this if I know better?" You may feel frustrated, as if your growth is not real. But the reaction does not mean your understanding is false. It means your nervous system is still adjusting. This adjustment takes time. It requires patience. It requires a different kind of attention. Not the attention that analyzes, but the attention that allows. When the reaction arises, the instinct is often to resist it, to push it away, to try to control it. But resistance adds tension. It tells the body that something is wrong, and this can reinforce the response. Instead, the shift comes from allowing the sensation to be there without immediately reacting to it. You notice it, you feel it, but you do not follow it into the old story. This is where the separation begins. The body responds, but the mind does not attach to the same narrative. Over time, this changes the pattern. The nervous system begins to learn that the present is not the past, not through words, but through experience. Each time a trigger appears and you remain present, the body receives new information. It learns that the situation is safe. It learns that the response is not necessary, and slowly, the intensity decreases. This is how healing happens on a deeper level, not by forcing the body to stop reacting, but by allowing it to update through new experiences. There is also a deeper layer to this. Sometimes the stories that your wisdom has outgrown are still stored as emotional patterns. You may no longer believe certain things about yourself, but the feeling associated with those beliefs may still arise. For example, you may understand that you are capable, but still feel a sense of doubt in certain situations. You may know that you are safe, but still feel anxious in certain environments. This is not a contradiction. It is a reflection of how the mind and body store experience differently. The mind updates through insight. The body updates through repetition. Both are necessary. This is why it is important to be patient with yourself, to recognize that understanding is only one part of the process. Integration takes longer. It involves allowing the body to catch up. This requires a different approach. Instead of trying to eliminate the reaction, you focus on how you respond to it. You create a sense of safety in the present. You ground yourself. You bring attention to your breath, to your body, to what is actually happening now. This signals to the nervous system that the current moment is different, that the threat is not real, that it can relax. This process is gradual. It does not happen instantly, but each time you remain present, you reinforce the new pattern. You show the body that it does not need to hold on to the old response, and over time, the reaction becomes less automatic, less intense, less frequent. There is also a shift in how you interpret these moments. Instead of seeing them as setbacks, you begin to see them as part of the healing process. You recognize that the reaction is not a sign that you are still stuck. It is a sign that something is being released. This changes your relationship with it. You no longer fear it. You no longer judge it. You allow it to move through you, and this allows it to pass more easily. There is also a deeper sense of trust that develops. You begin to trust that your system is adjusting, that your awareness is guiding the process, that even when reactions arise, they do not define your progress. They are simply part of the transition. This trust creates calm. It reduces the urgency to fix everything immediately. It allows you to move through the process with more ease. And as this becomes more stable, you begin to notice something else. The gap between the reaction and your response starts to grow. You feel the sensation, but you do not immediately act on it. You notice the thought, but you do not automatically believe it. This space is important. It is where freedom lives. Because in that space, you are no longer controlled by the past. You are choosing how to respond in the present. This choice is not forced. It emerges naturally as awareness deepens, and the more you practice this, the more it becomes your default. The old patterns lose their strength. The new patterns become more stable, and the present becomes clearer, less influenced by what has been, more aligned with what is. And as this clarity deepens, another realization begins to emerge. Because even when the body starts to release old reactions, there is still a simple but powerful shift that can anchor you in the present. A shift that does not require effort, but changes how you relate to everything that has come before. And as your body slowly begins to settle, as those old reactions lose their grip and the space between stimulus and response starts to widen, something very simple begins to appear. Not a complex technique, not a long explanation, but a quiet sentence that changes how you relate to everything behind you. It is easy to overlook. It does not sound powerful, but when it is understood deeply, it creates a clear boundary between who you were and who you are. Because without that boundary, the past keeps blending into the present. And no matter how much you grow, you keep being pulled back into an identity that no longer belongs to you. This is where something shifts, not through effort, but through recognition. Let's go deeper. There is a subtle habit the mind carries that often goes unnoticed. It treats identity as something fixed. It assumes that who you were is who you are, and who you are is who you will always be. It takes moments from the past and uses them to define your entire sense of self. This is why certain memories feel so personal, not because of what happened, but because of what they seem to say about you. When the mind says, "I failed," it quickly becomes, "I am someone who fails." When the mind says, "I hurt someone," it quietly becomes, "I am someone who causes harm." This shift happens so quickly that it feels natural, but it is not accurate. It is a distortion created by the mind's need for consistency. The truth is, you are not a fixed identity. You are a process. You are constantly changing, learning, adjusting, becoming. The person you were years ago is not the same person who is sitting here now. Even the person you were yesterday is not exactly the same. Yet the mind continues to connect these versions as if they are identical. This is where the quiet power of a simple recognition begins. That was me then. This is me now. At first, this may sound like a statement, but it is more than that. It is a shift in perspective. It separates the past from the present without denying either. It acknowledges what happened while also recognizing that it does not define who you are now. When you say this with awareness, something inside you begins to relax. The tension created by trying to merge your past and present starts to dissolve. You no longer feel the need to carry everything forward. You allow it to stay where it belongs. This creates space, and in that space, you can begin to see yourself more clearly, not through the lens of what happened, but through the awareness you have now. There is also a shift in how you relate to your own growth. Instead of seeing your past as something that contradicts who you are, you begin to see it as part of the path that led you here. It becomes something that contributed to your awareness, not something that invalidates it. This changes the way you hold your story. It becomes less rigid, less defined by single moments, more open, more expansive. You begin to see that you are not bound by what you did when you knew less. You are shaped by how you have evolved since then. This brings a sense of freedom. Not because the past disappears, but because it no longer controls your sense of self. Another important aspect of this shift is how it affects your reactions in the present. When you are still identifying with your past self, every situation feels like a test. You feel the need to prove that you are different. You monitor your behavior. You question your intentions. You carry a subtle pressure to get things right. But when you recognize the separation between then and now, that pressure begins to fade. You no longer need to prove anything. You are not trying to escape a past identity. You are simply living from your current awareness. This creates ease. It allows your actions to flow more naturally. It allows you to respond instead of react. There is also a deeper sense of trust that emerges. You begin to trust that the awareness you have now is enough. You do not need to constantly look back to guide your decisions. You can rely on your present understanding. This does not mean you ignore your experiences. It means you integrate them in a way that supports you rather than limits you. The phrase becomes a reminder, a way to gently return to the present when the mind starts to drift backward. When a memory arises and tries to pull you into an old identity, you can acknowledge it and then return to what is true. That was me then. This is me now. This is not about rejecting the past. It is about placing it in its proper context. It allows you to remember without becoming, to reflect without attaching, to learn without carrying unnecessary weight. There is also a shift in how you experience time. Instead of feeling like everything is connected in a way that traps you, you begin to see time as movement. Each moment becomes an opportunity to express who you are now, not who you were. This creates a sense of renewal, a feeling that you are not stuck in a loop, but moving forward. It allows you to engage with life more fully, because you are no longer dragging an old version of yourself into every situation. You are meeting each moment as it is. This presence changes everything. It brings clarity. It reduces unnecessary tension. It allows you to experience things without the filter of past identities. There is also a deeper emotional release that comes with this. When you stop identifying with your past self, the emotional charge around certain memories begins to soften. They lose their intensity. Not because they no longer matter, but because they are no longer tied to your sense of self. You can hold them with more neutrality, with more understanding, with less weight. This allows you to move forward without feeling like you are carrying something unfinished. You begin to feel complete in the present, not because everything has been resolved perfectly, but because you are no longer holding on to outdated definitions of who you are. This completeness is not something you achieve. It is something you recognize. It is already there beneath the layers of identification. And as you continue to return to this recognition, it becomes more stable. The mind may still try to bring up old patterns, but you see them more quickly. You recognize the attempt to merge past and present, and instead of following it, you return to what is true. That was me then. This is me now. This becomes a quiet anchor, a way to stay grounded in your current awareness, a way to honor your growth without being trapped by your history. And as this understanding deepens, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you can clearly separate who you were from who you are, there is still a pattern that can quietly bring you back into old beliefs. A pattern that turns past mistakes into something much heavier than they need to be. And as that quiet separation becomes more stable, as you begin to feel the difference between who you were and who you are now, something else starts to surface. A deeper pattern that has been quietly shaping how you see yourself for a long time. It is not loud, it does not always speak clearly, but you can feel it in certain moments, especially when you think about your past. It turns a single mistake into something much bigger, not just something that happened, but something that defines you. And without realizing it, you begin to carry that definition into everything. This is where the weight returns, not because of the past itself, but because of what you believe it says about your worth. Let's go deeper. There is a silent shift that happens when the mind looks at a mistake and draws a conclusion about identity. At first, it is simple. Something happened that did not go as planned. There was a choice, an action, a moment that led to an outcome you wish had been different. That is all. But the mind rarely leaves it there. It asks a deeper question. What does this say about me? And this is where things begin to change. Instead of seeing the mistake as an event, the mind begins to interpret it as evidence. Evidence that supports a belief about who you are. This is how one moment becomes a conclusion. Not just I made a mistake, but I am not good enough. Not just I hurt someone, but I am someone who causes harm. Not just I failed, but I am a failure. This shift is subtle, but it carries a heavy impact. Because once a belief like this forms, it does not stay isolated. It spreads. It influences how you see new situations. It shapes how you respond to challenges. It limits what you believe is possible for you, and it creates a quiet sense of unworthiness that follows you into the present. The problem is not the mistake itself. It is the meaning you have attached to it. Mistakes are part of being human. They happen in moments of limited awareness, in situations where understanding is incomplete. They are part of the process of learning and growth, but when they are used as proof of unworthiness, they take on a different role. They become barriers. They stop you from moving forward. They create hesitation. They create doubt. They create a sense that you must hold yourself back. This is how the past continues to shape the present, not through the event, but through the belief. There is also a pattern in how the mind reinforces this belief. It does not just rely on one memory, it searches for more. It looks for other moments that seem to support the same conclusion. It connects them together, and slowly, a story forms. A story that feels consistent. A story that feels true. But this story is selective. It highlights certain experiences and ignores others. It focuses on what went wrong and overlooks what went right. It builds a narrative that is incomplete, yet convincing. This is how unworthiness takes root, not as a fact, but as a repeated interpretation. The shift begins when you start to question the connection between mistakes and worth. You ask yourself, does what I did in one moment truly define my value as a person? This question opens space. It allows you to see that actions and identity are not the same. You can make a mistake without being defined by it. You can learn from something without turning it into a permanent label. This distinction is important because when you separate the two, the weight begins to lift. You no longer see your past as proof of something fixed. You begin to see it as part of a process that includes growth, change, and increased awareness. There is also a deeper layer to this shift. You begin to recognize that your worth is not something that can be increased or decreased by individual actions. It is not something that is earned through perfection or lost through mistakes. It is something that exists beneath all of that. This may not feel obvious at first, because the mind is used to measuring. It compares, evaluates, judges. It creates standards and tries to meet them. But worth is not a measurement. It is a recognition. A recognition that you are here, that you are capable of awareness, that you are able to grow and change. When you see this, the pressure to prove yourself begins to ease. You no longer feel the need to justify your existence through perfect behavior. You allow yourself to be human. This does not remove responsibility. It changes the way you hold it. You still acknowledge your actions. You still learn from them. But you do not use them as a reason to diminish yourself. This creates a more balanced relationship with your past. You can see clearly what happened without collapsing into judgment. You can take the lesson without carrying the label. You can move forward without the constant need to prove your worth. There is also a shift in how you approach the present. When you no longer see your past mistakes as proof of unworthiness, you become more open. You take more chances. You express yourself more freely. You engage with life without the constant fear of confirming a negative belief. This creates a different kind of energy, one that is not driven by avoidance, but by presence. You are not trying to avoid being someone you believe you are. You are simply being who you are now. This is where confidence begins to grow, not as a reaction to past mistakes, but as a natural result of being present and aware. There is also a change in how you interpret new experiences. When something does not go as planned, you do not immediately connect it to a larger narrative about yourself. You see it as a moment, something to reflect on, something to learn from, but not something that defines you. This keeps the experience contained. It prevents it from spreading into other areas of your life. It allows you to move on more easily. This is how you stop the pattern of turning mistakes into proof. You stop making them mean more than they actually do. You place them in context. You see them as part of your experience, not as the foundation of your identity. There is also a sense of relief that comes with this. You no longer feel the need to carry a constant judgment. You no longer feel the need to revisit the past to confirm a belief. You allow yourself to move forward without that weight. This does not mean you forget. It means you remember differently, with clarity, with understanding, with a sense that what happened does not define what is possible now. And as this understanding deepens, something else begins to reveal itself. Because even when you stop using your past as proof of unworthiness, there may still be a part of you that believes holding on to that pain serves a purpose. A belief that continuing to punish yourself somehow helps others or balances what has already happened. And as that sense of unworthiness begins to loosen, another belief quietly reveals itself. It does not come from logic, but it feels deeply convincing. It tells you that holding on to pain serves a purpose, that continuing to feel bad is somehow meaningful, even necessary. A part of you may believe that if you stop punishing yourself, you are letting something important slip away, that the pain you carry is connected to the people you hurt, as if your suffering is a form of repayment, a way to balance what has already happened. But something inside you also feels the exhaustion of this, the sense that no matter how long you carry it, nothing changes. This is where a deeper truth begins to surface, because the pain you continue to hold is not reaching backward, it is only staying here. Let's go deeper. There is a quiet assumption that often goes unnoticed. It suggests that your continued suffering somehow benefits the past, that feeling guilty for longer, being harder on yourself, or denying yourself peace is a way of honoring the impact of what happened. It feels like a form of responsibility. But when you look closely, something becomes clear. The past cannot feel your punishment. The person you hurt cannot be healed by your internal struggle. The event that already unfolded does not change based on how long you carry the weight. Yet the mind continues to act as if it does. It creates a connection between your suffering now and what happened then, as if the two are linked in a way that allows you to correct something through pain. But this connection is not real. It is a belief, and this belief keeps you trapped in a cycle that does not serve anyone. You may think that by holding on to guilt, you are showing that you care, that by continuing to feel bad, you are proving that the situation mattered. But caring is not measured by how much you suffer. It is measured by how you grow, how you act, and how you move forward. There is a difference between feeling the impact of your actions and turning that impact into a permanent state of punishment. The first leads to awareness. The second leads to stagnation. When you punish yourself, your energy becomes inward and restricted. You are focused on your own pain, your own thoughts, your own sense of regret. This limits your ability to be present, to respond, and to contribute in a meaningful way. It keeps you occupied with something that cannot be changed, while taking you away from what can still be influenced. Healing, on the other hand, requires presence. It requires clarity. It requires the ability to act from understanding, not from self-criticism. If someone was affected by your actions, what they need is not your continued suffering. They need awareness. They need accountability. They need change. And sometimes they need space. None of these are created through self-punishment. They come from how you show up now. When you are caught in a cycle of self-blame, it becomes difficult to take constructive action. You may hesitate to reach out, to apologize, or to make things right, because you are so focused on your own guilt that it becomes overwhelming. In this way, punishment can actually delay healing. It keeps you stuck in a state where nothing moves forward. There is also a deeper emotional layer to this pattern. Sometimes holding on to pain feels like the only way to stay connected to what happened. It creates a sense that you are not ignoring it, that you are still acknowledging it. But acknowledgement does not require suffering. You can fully recognize the impact of your actions without continuously hurting yourself. You can hold the memory with awareness, without turning it into a source of ongoing pain. This is where the shift begins. You start to see that the purpose of regret is not to last forever. It is to guide you toward understanding. Once that understanding is reached, the role of regret is complete. Continuing beyond that point does not add value. It only adds weight. There is also a misunderstanding about what it means to take responsibility. Responsibility is often confused with self-punishment, but they are not the same. Taking responsibility means recognizing what happened, understanding your role in it, and choosing to act differently moving forward. It is active, it is present, it is focused on change. Self-punishment, on the other hand, is passive. It keeps you in the past. It repeats the same thoughts. It does not lead to action. It creates the illusion of responsibility without the movement of growth. When you see this clearly, something begins to shift. You realize that continuing to suffer does not make you more responsible. It keeps you from being fully present. And presence is where real change happens. There is also a question that can help bring clarity to this pattern. You can ask yourself, if my continued pain could truly heal what happened, would it have done so by now? Often, the answer is clear. The time you have already spent in that state has not changed the past. It has only affected your present. This recognition is not meant to dismiss your feelings. It is meant to show you that there is another way. A way that does not require you to carry unnecessary suffering. A way that allows you to honor what happened while still allowing yourself to move forward. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you express that care in a different way. Through your actions, through your awareness, through how you treat others now, through how you treat yourself now. There is also a deeper sense of compassion that emerges when you release self-punishment. Not just compassion for yourself, but for the situation as a whole. You begin to see that everyone involved was acting from their own level of awareness, their own understanding, their own limitations. This does not remove accountability. It broadens your perspective. It allows you to see the full picture, not just your part in isolation. And from this place, your response becomes more balanced, more thoughtful, more aligned with growth. You are no longer reacting from guilt. You are responding from understanding. This creates a different kind of energy, one that is not driven by fear or self-criticism, but by clarity. And this clarity allows you to contribute in a meaningful way, to make different choices, to engage with life in a way that reflects what you have learned. This is where real healing begins, not in the repetition of pain, but in the application of awareness. And as this understanding settles, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you release the need to punish yourself, there is still a deeper challenge that remains, a challenge that is not about changing the past, but about making peace with it, even when it cannot be resolved in the way you once hoped. And as that weight begins to fall away, as you loosen the need to punish yourself and start to act from awareness instead of guilt, something deeper quietly rises. A truth that is harder to accept than any mistake. Some things will never change, no matter how clearly you understand them, no matter how much you grow, no matter how many times you wish it had been different. The past will remain exactly as it is. And this is where many people struggle the most, because a part of the mind still hopes for a different ending. It keeps searching for a version of events that feels easier to accept, softer to hold, less painful to remember. But reality does not rewrite itself, and until this is fully accepted, peace feels just out of reach. Let's go deeper. There is a quiet tension that lives in the space between what happened and what you wish had happened. It is not always obvious, but it shapes how you feel when certain memories arise. You may not say it out loud, but the feeling is there. This should not have happened. It could have been different. If only I had. These thoughts create resistance, not resistance to the present, but to the past. And this resistance keeps the experience active. Because when the mind refuses to accept what has already occurred, it continues to engage with it as if it can still influence the outcome. This is where suffering is maintained, not by the event itself, but by the ongoing refusal to let it be what it is. The Buddhist approach to this is not about agreement. It is not about saying what happened was right or justified. It is about acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood. It does not mean approval. It does not mean you like what happened. It does not mean you would choose it again. It means you stop fighting reality. You stop trying to change something that cannot be changed. This is where peace begins, not because everything is resolved in the way you wanted, but because the internal struggle ends. There is a shift that happens when you move from "this should not have happened" to "this did happen." That shift may seem small, but it changes how the mind relates to the memory. The first statement creates tension. The second creates space. In that space, the emotional charge begins to soften. You are no longer pushing against something fixed. You are allowing it to exist without resistance. This does not erase the impact. It changes your relationship to it. There is also a deeper layer to this. Sometimes the mind believes that accepting the past means giving up on justice, on fairness, on what should have been. It feels like surrender. But this is not the kind of surrender that weakens you. It is the kind that frees you. You are not surrendering your values. You are surrendering the illusion that the past can be different. This allows your energy to return to the present, where it can actually make a difference. Because as long as your attention is tied to what cannot be changed, it is not fully available to what can. Making peace with the past does not remove the lessons. It allows you to carry them without the burden of resistance. You can still act with integrity. You can still make different choices. You can still live in alignment with what you have learned. But you do it from a place of clarity, not conflict. There is also a subtle release that comes when you stop needing the past to change. You no longer feel the urge to revisit it in the same way. You no longer search for alternative outcomes. You no longer replay it, hoping it will feel different. You begin to let it rest. Not because it is unimportant, but because it is complete. This sense of completion is not given to you. It is recognized by you. It comes when you stop adding resistance. There is also a deeper emotional freedom that emerges. When you are no longer tied to the idea that things should have been different, your experience of the present changes. You feel lighter, more open, less constrained by what has already passed. You are not carrying an argument with reality, and without that argument, your mind becomes quieter. There is less tension, less repetition, less need to control. This quietness creates space for something new, a sense of peace that does not depend on circumstances, a stability that is not shaken by memory, a clarity that allows you to move forward without being pulled back. This does not mean the memory disappears. It means it no longer holds the same power. It becomes part of your story, not the center of it. You can recall it without being overwhelmed. You can reflect on it without being trapped. You can acknowledge it without being defined by it. This is where true acceptance lives, not in forgetting, but in releasing the need for it to be different. There is also a practical side to this. When you make peace with the past, your decisions in the present become clearer. You are not reacting to old resistance. You are responding to what is actually in front of you. This allows you to act with intention, to choose with awareness, to move forward without hesitation, because your attention is no longer divided. It is here, fully here, and from this place, your actions become more aligned, more grounded, more effective. There is also a sense of trust that develops. Trust in your ability to navigate life without needing to control everything. Trust in your capacity to learn and grow. Trust in the process itself. This trust reduces the need to hold on to the past as a reference point for every decision. You no longer need to constantly look back to guide yourself. You begin to rely on your present awareness, and this awareness is enough. It is shaped by everything you have experienced, but it is not limited by it. It allows you to move forward with confidence, not because you are certain of every outcome, but because you are grounded in your ability to respond. This is where peace becomes stable, not as a temporary state, but as a way of being, a way of relating to life that is not dependent on changing what cannot be changed. And as this understanding deepens, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you make peace with the past, there is still a subtle way it can continue to limit your future. Not through resistance, but through attachment to certain emotions that feel familiar, even when they no longer serve you. And as that sense of peace begins to settle, as you stop fighting what cannot be changed and allow the past to rest where it belongs, something subtle still remains. It does not feel like resistance anymore. It feels quieter, almost justified, a gentle pull backward, not to relive everything, but to hold on to one feeling: regret. It seems harmless at first, even responsible. It feels like a reminder of what matters, a sign that you have learned, that you care. But there is something hidden inside this attachment that most people never see. Because while one part of you is trying to move forward, another part is still holding on to what has already passed. And that quiet holding is enough to block something new from entering your life. Let's go deeper. There is a natural flow to life that often goes unnoticed. Every moment presents an opportunity to respond, to act, to create something new. Each thought, each decision, each action carries an effect. This is the essence of what is often described as karma. Not as something mystical or distant, but as a simple truth. What you do now shapes what comes next. But this shaping requires presence. It requires your attention to be here, not divided between now and what has already ended. When you cling to regret, your attention is split. Part of you is in the present, but another part is still looking backward, still holding on to something that no longer needs to be held. This division weakens your ability to act fully. You may hesitate when an opportunity appears. You may doubt yourself when a choice needs to be made. You may hold back from expressing something genuine because a part of you is still connected to a past moment. This is how regret blocks creation. Not by force, but by distraction. It pulls your energy away from the present and keeps it tied to something that cannot change. There is also a subtle emotional effect that comes with clinging to regret. It creates a background tone in your experience, a quiet heaviness, a sense that something is not fully resolved. And this tone influences how you engage with life. You may approach new situations with caution, not because they require it, but because you are still influenced by what happened before. You may avoid certain paths, not because they are wrong, but because they remind you of something you regret. You may limit your expression, not because it is inappropriate, but because you are still holding on to a sense of self shaped by the past. This is where the blockage becomes clear. It is not that you are incapable of creating something new. It is that your attention is not fully available to it. There is also a deeper belief that often supports this pattern. The idea that holding on to regret keeps you grounded, that it prevents you from becoming careless, that it ensures you do not repeat the same mistakes. But this belief overlooks something important. Awareness, not regret, is what guides wise action. You do not need to feel bad in order to act well. You need to see clearly. Clarity allows you to respond appropriately. Regret, when held too long, clouds that clarity. It keeps your focus on what has already happened instead of what is happening now. This reduces your ability to respond effectively. It limits your engagement. It keeps you from fully participating in the present moment. There is also a practical aspect to this. Every moment you spend clinging to regret is a moment not used for creation. Creation does not always mean something large or visible. It can be a conversation, a decision, a small act of kindness, a shift in how you respond. These moments build on each other. They shape your experience over time, but they require your presence. When your attention is tied to regret, these moments pass without full engagement. You may still act, but not with the same clarity or intention. This affects the quality of your actions, and over time, it affects the direction of your life. There is also a deeper emotional layer. Clinging to regret often comes with a sense of unworthiness, a belief that you do not deserve to move forward freely, that you must carry something in order to remain accountable. This belief limits your openness. It keeps you from fully embracing new possibilities, because a part of you feels that you are not ready, not allowed, not deserving. This is where the blockage becomes internal, not imposed from outside, but maintained from within. The shift begins when you recognize that holding on to regret is not a requirement for growth. It is a habit, a pattern that has been reinforced over time. When you see this, you begin to question it. You ask yourself, Is this helping me create something better now? If the answer is no, then you begin to loosen your grip, not by forcing yourself to let go, but by understanding that it is no longer needed. This understanding creates space. In that space, your attention returns to the present. And with your attention here, your ability to act becomes clearer. You begin to engage with life more directly. You respond based on what is in front of you, not based on what has already happened. This changes the quality of your actions. They become more aligned, more intentional, more reflective of your current awareness. And this is where new outcomes begin to form, not because you are trying to fix the past, but because you are fully present in what you are creating now. There is also a sense of lightness that comes with this shift. When you release the need to carry regret, your energy becomes available. You are no longer divided. You are here, fully here. And from this place, you can create something different, something that reflects who you are now, not who you were then. This is where the idea of karma becomes practical. Your present actions shape your future, not through intention alone, but through consistent engagement. Each moment becomes an opportunity, not to correct the past, but to express your current understanding. This expression builds. It creates a new direction, one that is not limited by previous experiences. There is also a deeper sense of trust that emerges. Trust in your ability to respond wisely. Trust in your growth. Trust that you do not need to hold on to regret to stay grounded. This trust allows you to move forward with more ease, more openness, more confidence, not because everything is certain, but because you are present. And presence is where clarity lives. As this becomes more stable, the pull of regret weakens. It no longer feels necessary. It no longer feels like something you need to carry. It becomes something you can acknowledge and then release. And as you release it, something else begins to reveal itself. Because even when you stop clinging to regret, there is still a deeper pattern that can keep you connected to familiar emotional states. A pattern that has less to do with the past itself and more to do with what the mind has learned to feel safe within. And as that grip on regret begins to loosen, as your attention slowly returns to the present and your energy becomes available again, something deeper starts to reveal itself. It is not about the past anymore. It is about what your mind has quietly learned to hold on to. Because even when you are ready to move forward, even when you know you no longer need to carry the same weight, there can still be a pull backward, not because you want to suffer, but because something inside you feels familiar there. And the mind often chooses what is familiar, even when it hurts, over what is unknown, even when it is peaceful. This is where a hidden pattern begins to surface. One that explains why letting go can feel uncomfortable even when it is the right thing to do. Let's go deeper. There is a basic function of the mind that is often misunderstood. It is constantly trying to keep you safe. But the way it defines safety is not based on what is actually good for you. It is based on what it knows. Familiarity becomes its reference point. If something has been experienced repeatedly, the mind begins to categorize it as predictable, and predictability feels safe, even if the experience itself is painful. This is why certain emotional patterns continue, not because they are helpful, but because they are known. If you have spent a long time feeling regret, self-doubt, or guilt, those feelings become part of your internal environment. They become states that the mind recognizes. They feel normal, and anything that feels normal begins to feel safe. This is where the confusion begins. The mind does not ask, "Is this good for me?" It asks, "Do I know this?" If the answer is yes, it stays. If the answer is no, it hesitates. This is why peace can feel unfamiliar. And when something is unfamiliar, the mind does not immediately trust it. It questions it. It looks for reasons why it might not last. It prepares for a return to what it knows. This is how familiar pain becomes a kind of comfort. Not because it is pleasant, but because it is predictable. There are no surprises, no unknown outcomes, You already know how it feels, how it unfolds, how it ends, and that sense of knowing creates a false sense of control. But this control is limited. It keeps you within a certain range of experience. It prevents you from exploring new ways of being, because stepping into something new requires uncertainty, and uncertainty feels unsafe to the mind. This is why letting go of old patterns can feel uncomfortable, not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are moving beyond what the mind has been conditioned to recognize. There is also a deeper emotional layer to this. When you have spent time in certain states, they become associated with your identity. You begin to see yourself through them. If you have been carrying regret, you may begin to feel that letting go means losing something important. If you have been critical of yourself, you may feel that being kind to yourself is unnatural. If you have been cautious and hesitant, you may feel that openness is risky. These associations create resistance. They make it difficult to step into a new state, even when it is healthier. Because the mind is not just reacting to the change, it is reacting to the loss of familiarity. This is where awareness becomes important. When you recognize that the discomfort you feel is not a sign of danger, but a sign of change, something shifts. You stop interpreting it as a warning. You begin to see it as part of the process. This allows you to stay present with it. Instead of retreating back to what is familiar, you remain with the new experience. Even if it feels uncertain, even if it feels different. This is how new patterns begin to form. Not through force, but through repeated exposure. Each time you stay with the unfamiliar without retreating, the mind begins to adjust. It starts to recognize the new state. It becomes less resistant. Over time, what once felt unfamiliar begins to feel natural. This is how the sense of safety shifts. It moves from what is known to what is aligned. There is also a change in how you relate to your own emotions. Instead of seeing discomfort as something to avoid, you begin to see it as something to understand. You notice the urge to return to familiar patterns. You observe the thoughts that try to pull you back, and instead of following them, you remain aware. This awareness creates space. In that space, you have a choice. You can return to what is known, or you can stay with what is new. Each time you choose to stay, you weaken the old pattern. You reduce its influence. You create room for something different. This is not a quick process. It requires patience. It requires consistency. But it does not require struggle. It requires willingness. A willingness to experience something new without immediately rejecting it. There is also a deeper sense of freedom that comes with this. When you are no longer driven by familiarity, you are able to respond more clearly. You are not limited by what you have experienced before. You are open to what is happening now. This openness allows for growth. It allows for new possibilities. It allows for a different kind of stability, one that is not based on repetition, but on awareness. You begin to trust that you can navigate uncertainty, that you can handle what arises, that you do not need to rely on old patterns to feel safe. This trust becomes your foundation. And from that foundation, your experience of life begins to change. You are no longer confined to a narrow range of emotions. You are not pulled back into familiar pain. You are free to experience something different, something lighter, something more aligned with who you are now. And as this understanding deepens, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because even when you begin to move beyond familiar pain, there is still a subtle attachment that can hold you back. An attachment not just to feelings, but to the idea that you must remain the same person you have always been. And as you begin to loosen the grip of familiar pain, as you stop returning to old emotional patterns simply because they feel known, something even deeper begins to surface. A quiet attachment that is not just about feelings, but about identity itself. Because beyond the pain, beyond the regret, beyond the patterns, there is something the mind holds on to very tightly. The idea of who you are, not who you are in this moment, but who you have always been. And without realizing it, this idea becomes another kind of prison, one that keeps you repeating, not because you need to, but because you believe you must remain consistent with a version of yourself that no longer fits. This is where the next shift begins. Let's go deeper. There is a subtle pressure the mind creates around identity. It tells you that you must be the same person you have always been, that your past defines your present, that changing too much would mean losing something important. This pressure is not always obvious. It shows up in small ways. You hesitate to act differently because it feels unfamiliar. You hold on to certain behaviors because they feel like you. You resist new perspectives because they challenge what you have always believed about yourself. This creates a kind of rigidity, a sense that you must stay within certain boundaries. But those boundaries are not real. They are constructed. They are based on repetition, not truth. The truth is, you are constantly changing. Every experience, every thought, every moment of awareness shifts something within you. The person you were yesterday is not exactly the same as the person you are today. And yet, the mind tries to maintain continuity. It tries to create a stable identity. It does this because stability feels safe. But this stability comes at a cost. It limits your growth. It keeps you tied to old patterns. It prevents you from fully stepping into who you are becoming. This is where the practice of release begins, not releasing the past itself, but releasing the need to remain the same. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about allowing yourself to evolve, to respond to life as it is now rather than as it was. There is also a deeper fear that often accompanies this process, the fear of losing yourself. If you let go of certain traits, certain beliefs, certain ways of being, what remains? This question can feel unsettling, but it is based on a misunderstanding. You are not losing yourself. You are uncovering yourself. What you have been holding on to is not your true identity. It is a collection of habits, reactions, and patterns formed over time. When you release these, you do not disappear. You become clearer, more aligned, more present. There is also a sense of freedom that comes with this. When you no longer feel the need to be consistent with your past, you are free to respond differently. You can change your mind. You can choose a new direction. You can let go of behaviors that no longer serve you without feeling like you are betraying who you are, because who you are is not fixed. It is dynamic. It is shaped by your awareness in each moment. This awareness becomes your foundation, not a set of past behaviors, but a present understanding. And from this understanding, your actions flow naturally. They are not forced. They are not constrained by old definitions. They reflect who you are now. There is also a shift in how you relate to your own growth. Instead of seeing change as something to manage or control, you begin to see it as something to allow. You stop trying to hold on to a specific version of yourself. You become more open, more flexible, more responsive. This creates a different kind of stability, not one based on fixed identity, but one based on adaptability. You are stable not because you do not change, but because you can navigate change. This is a deeper form of strength, one that is not threatened by new experiences or new insights. It embraces them. There is also a practical aspect to this shift. When you release the need to be the same person, you open the door to new possibilities. You are no longer limited by past decisions. You are no longer defined by previous outcomes. You can explore new ways of thinking, new ways of acting, new ways of being. This expands your experience. It allows you to engage with life more fully, without the constant reference to who you used to be. There is also a deeper sense of peace that comes with this. When you stop trying to maintain a fixed identity, there is less tension, less effort, less need to control. You allow yourself to be present, to respond to what is happening now, without the burden of maintaining consistency with the past. This presence brings clarity. It allows you to see things as they are, not through the lens of who you have been, but through the awareness you have now. This clarity supports better decisions. It allows you to act in alignment with your current understanding, not out of habit, but out of intention. There is also a sense of lightness that emerges. When you are no longer carrying the weight of a fixed identity, you move more freely. You are not restricted by old labels. You are not confined by past definitions. You are open, available, engaged. This changes how you experience life. It becomes less about maintaining a certain image and more about being present, more about responding, more about growing. And as this understanding deepens, something else begins to reveal itself, because even when you release the need to be the same person, there is still a subtle pattern that can keep you connected to the past, a pattern that has less to do with identity and more to do with how you relate to the present moment itself. And as that grip on identity begins to loosen, as you stop trying to be who you used to be and allow yourself to become who you are now, something even more powerful starts to emerge. A quiet ability that has been there all along, but often goes unnoticed. The ability to be here, fully here, not in memory, not in projection, not in comparison, but in this exact moment without carrying anything extra. And this is where something begins to break, not through force, not through effort, but through awareness. Because what has been holding the past in place is not the event itself. It is the continuous attention you have been giving to it. And when that attention returns to the present, the chain begins to loosen. Let's go deeper. There is a pattern the mind follows without asking permission. It moves from one moment to another, linking them together through thought, emotion, and memory. When something painful happens, the mind stores it, not just as an image or an idea, but as a feeling. That feeling becomes a reference point, and from that reference point, the mind begins to create a chain. One thought leads to another. One memory triggers the next. One emotion pulls in a familiar pattern, and before you realize it, you are no longer here. You are connected to something behind you. This chain is not physical, it is mental, but its effect is very real. It keeps the past active. It keeps the emotional weight alive. It creates a sense that something is still ongoing, even when it has already ended. This is what can be understood as emotional debt. Not a real debt, but a felt obligation. A sense that something is still unfinished, still unresolved, still needing attention. And because of this feeling, the mind keeps returning. It keeps replaying. It keeps trying to resolve what cannot be changed. But here is where awareness changes everything. When your attention is fully in the present, the chain cannot continue, because the chain depends on movement through time. It depends on connecting now to then. But when you are fully here, there is no connection being made. There is only what is happening. This does not mean the past disappears. It means it is not being activated. There is a difference. When you are present, a thought may arise, a memory may appear, a feeling may move through you, but you are not following it. You are not building on it. You are not extending it. You notice it and it passes. This breaks the chain. Because the chain requires continuation, it requires engagement. Without that, it cannot sustain itself. There is also a shift in how you experience time. Instead of feeling pulled between what has been and what might be, you begin to feel grounded in what is. This grounding creates stability, not because everything is certain, but because you are not being carried away by mental movement. You are anchored. This anchor is not something you create. It is something you recognize. It is always available, in your breath, in your body, in your immediate experience. Each time you return to these, you strengthen your connection to the present, and each time you do, the influence of the past weakens. This is not about suppressing thoughts. It is about not feeding them. When a thought arises, you do not push it away. You simply do not follow it. You allow it to exist without turning it into a story. This requires awareness, not constant effort, but gentle attention. You notice when the mind begins to move, you see the pattern forming, and instead of continuing, you return. Back to your breath, back to your senses, back to what is actually here. This return may seem small, but it has a powerful effect. It interrupts the chain. It prevents the continuation of old patterns. It allows the moment to stand on its own. There is also a deeper release that happens through this practice. When you stop engaging with old emotional patterns, they begin to lose their intensity. Not because you are forcing them to change, but because you are no longer reinforcing them. Each time you return to the present, you reduce the energy that keeps those patterns alive. Over time, they become less frequent, less intense, less automatic. This is how emotional debt dissolves, not through effort, but through non-participation. There is also a sense of freedom that comes with this. You begin to realize that you do not have to carry the past into every moment. You do not have to resolve everything before you can be at peace. You can be at peace now. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are not adding to what has already happened. This peace is simple. It does not require conditions. It arises naturally when the mind is not occupied with something else. There is also a change in how you respond to life. When you are present, your actions are not influenced by old patterns. They are based on what is actually happening. This creates clarity. You see situations more accurately. You respond more appropriately. You are not reacting from memory. You are acting from awareness. This makes your actions more effective, more aligned, more grounded. There is also a deeper trust that develops. Trust in your ability to be with what is. Trust that you do not need to rely on the past to guide you. Trust that your awareness is enough. This trust reduces the need to revisit old experiences. It reduces the sense of obligation. It allows you to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. Each moment becomes an opportunity, not to fix something, but to be present, to engage, to respond. This engagement creates new patterns, patterns that are not based on the past, but on your current awareness. This is how the chain is not just broken, but replaced with something new, something aligned, something that reflects who you are now. And as this practice becomes more stable, something else begins to reveal itself. Because even when you are present, even when the chain of the past is no longer pulling you back, there is still a deeper quality that can transform how you relate to yourself. A quality that does not come from effort, but from honesty. And as that presence begins to steady you, as the chain of the past loosens, and your attention rests more often in what is here, something deeper quietly asks to be seen. Not another technique, not another way to control the mind, but a different way of relating to yourself. Because even with awareness, even with understanding, there can still be a harsh edge inside, a voice that watches closely, that corrects, that judges, that believes being hard on yourself is the only way to stay honest. And this is where many people hesitate. They feel that if they soften, they will become careless. That if they are kind to themselves, they will lose discipline. That compassion is something fragile, something that weakens their ability to face truth. But something inside you already knows this is not fully accurate. There is a different kind of strength here, one that does not come from pressure, but from clarity. Let's go deeper. There is a common belief that self-compassion means letting yourself off the hook, that it is a way of avoiding responsibility, of making excuses, of pretending that things are not as serious as they are. Because of this belief, many people resist it. They choose self-criticism instead. They believe that being strict, being harsh, being unforgiving is what keeps them grounded. But if you look closely, you begin to see the cost of this approach. Harshness does not create clarity. It creates tension. It narrows your awareness. It keeps you focused on what is wrong rather than what is true. And over time, it becomes a habit, a way of relating to yourself that feels normal, even when it is harmful. Self-compassion is often misunderstood because it is confused with comfort. But it is not about making yourself feel better in a superficial way. It is about seeing yourself clearly, without distortion. It is about acknowledging what is present, without adding unnecessary judgment. This is where the idea of spiritual honesty comes in. Honesty is not just about recognizing mistakes. It is about recognizing the full context in which those mistakes happened. It is about seeing both the action and the awareness behind it. It is about understanding without exaggerating. When you are harsh with yourself, you often simplify the situation. You reduce it to a single conclusion. I was wrong. I failed. I should have been better. These statements feel honest, but they are incomplete. They ignore the complexity of your experience. They overlook the conditions that shaped your actions. They do not account for your level of awareness at the time. This is not full honesty. It is partial. Self-compassion expands that honesty. It allows you to see more, not less. You begin to recognize the emotional state you were in, the beliefs you were holding, the pressures you were facing, the things you did not yet understand. This does not remove responsibility. It places it within a broader perspective. It allows you to see yourself as a whole person, not as a single moment. This kind of seeing requires courage, because it means letting go of simple judgments. It means sitting with complexity. It means accepting that you are not just one thing. You are not just your mistakes. You are not just your successes. You are a process, and this process includes growth. Self-compassion supports this process. It creates an environment where learning can happen. When you are constantly criticizing yourself, your mind becomes defensive. It tries to protect itself from further judgment. It avoids looking too closely. It resists change. But when you approach yourself with compassion, that resistance softens. You become more open, more willing to reflect, more able to see clearly. This clarity leads to better understanding, and better understanding leads to more meaningful change. There is also a shift in how you respond to difficulties. When something challenging arises, the old pattern may be to react with self-criticism, to immediately look for what you did wrong, to reinforce a sense of inadequacy. But with self-compassion, the response changes. You acknowledge the difficulty. You recognize your reaction, but you do not add judgment. You allow yourself to experience the moment without making it a statement about your worth. This creates space, and in that space, you can respond more effectively. You are not overwhelmed by negative emotion. You are not limited by self-doubt. You are present. And from that presence, your actions become more aligned. There is also a deeper sense of connection that comes with self-compassion. When you treat yourself with understanding, you begin to recognize that your experiences are not unique. Others have felt similar things. Others have made similar mistakes. Others have gone through similar struggles. This recognition reduces isolation. It creates a sense of shared humanity. You are not alone in your experience. You are part of something larger. This perspective softens the intensity of your internal dialogue. It allows you to be more gentle, not because you are avoiding truth, but because you are seeing it more fully. There is also a practical benefit. When you are not consumed by self-criticism, your energy becomes available. You are able to focus on what matters. You can take action without being held back by doubt. You can engage with life more directly. This makes your efforts more effective. Not because you are pushing harder, but because you are not working against yourself. There is also a deeper sense of stability that develops. When your relationship with yourself is not based on constant judgment, it becomes more consistent. You are not fluctuating between extremes. You are not dependent on external validation. You have a steady foundation. This foundation supports growth. It allows you to take risks, to try new things, to step into unfamiliar situations, because you trust that regardless of the outcome, you will respond with understanding. This trust reduces fear. It allows you to move forward with more confidence. Not because you are certain of success, but because you are not afraid of failure. There is also a subtle shift in how you view strength. Strength is often associated with toughness, with resilience in the face of difficulty, with the ability to endure. But there is another kind of strength, one that comes from openness, from the ability to face yourself without turning away, from the willingness to see clearly without hiding behind judgment. This strength is quiet. It does not need to prove itself. It is present in how you relate to yourself in difficult moments, in how you respond when things do not go as planned, in how you treat yourself when you are not at your best. This is where self-compassion becomes a form of honesty. It does not distort reality. It reveals it. It allows you to see both your limitations and your potential. It holds both without collapsing into one. This balance is what supports true growth, not the kind driven by fear, but the kind grounded in awareness. And as this understanding deepens, something else begins to emerge. Because when you are no longer harsh with yourself, when you are able to see clearly without judgment, there is a new kind of freedom that becomes possible. A freedom that is not tied to the past, not dependent on fixing anything, but rooted in your ability to begin again, without needing permission from what has already happened. You have seen something most people spend years avoiding. The past is not what holds you down, it is how you hold the past. You have watched how the mind replays old pain, how regret disguises itself as responsibility, how self-blame quietly becomes attachment. You have seen how the body can still react even when your wisdom has already moved on, how familiar pain can feel safer than peace, and how identity can trap you in a version of yourself that no longer exists. But more importantly, you have discovered something deeper. You are not your past, not your worst moment, not your regrets, not the story your mind keeps repeating. You are the awareness that can see it and choose differently. And in that choice, everything changes. Because the moment you stop asking the past for permission, the moment you stop reopening closed doors, the moment you stop punishing yourself for what has already ended, you return to the only place where freedom has ever existed. Here, now. And from this place, you are not fixing your life. You are finally living it. If something in this message spoke to you, if you felt even a small shift, write in the comments, "I release the past." Not for me, but for yourself. Let it be a quiet decision, a line you draw between who you were and who you are choosing to be. And if you want more teachings like this, simple, deep and real, subscribe to the channel and stay with this journey. Because this is not just something you listen to, it is something you become. A calmer mind, a lighter heart, a life that is no longer controlled by what is already gone.